Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. On a calm street in the Grapevine Hollow neighborhood early on January 1, 2012, the joyous mood gave way to fear and terror. Ashley Fallis, a young mother who had been shot in the head, was being transported in an ambulance to the hospital, her life in shambles. When her parents returned from a brief absence, they were shocked to see paramedics and police encircling the house. Only a few hours before, there had been a lot of happiness and celebration in the house. What had transpired on this particular New Year's Eve? Her husband Tom, who was present in the room when the tragedy occurred, was the only person who could know the answer. However, his account of what happened left more questions than it resolved. Although Ashley's family was certain they knew the truth, investigators had to deal with a lot of inconsistencies and odd information. Nobody could have predicted the depth of the mystery that existed behind those houses' doors. Ashley Fallis, then 28 years old, was shot in the head and taken to the hospital early on January 1, 2012. Ashley's family thought they knew what had happened right away. It was clear to them that her husband Tom was the only possible culprit. When the gunshot was fired, he and Ashley were in the room. Tom was Ashley's family's main suspect because of his short fuse and domineer. For the police, though, the story was less straightforward. A detailed investigation was necessary because contradicting evidence was discovered at the scene. Ashley's past turned out to be as complicated as her present, and witness accounts continued to change. It would be years before fresh information surfaced that would provide a new perspective on what happened that night. The festive evening that started on December 31, 2011, was intended to be peaceful and centered around the family. At their Zinfandel Street residence, Tom and Ashley Fallis threw a New Year's celebration. They celebrated, danced, and drank. Ashley and Tom appeared to be a contented couple. To the delight of their guests, they had been dancing together and gazing affectionately at each other just an hour before. However, as midnight drew near, Ashley made the announcement that she was going outside with her family, which infuriated Tom. Ashley's family was the last group of guests left at the house when the argument broke out. Ashley and her family attempted to defend her, but Tom started shouting at them. Tom demanded that the relatives leave after their attempts at mediation failed. Tom withdrew to the bedroom and slammed the door. The couple was left alone when Ashley's parents also made the decision to move out. Tragic events occurred several hours later. Ashley's family's intrusion into their private lives irritated Tom. Ashley and her parents had been drinking all evening, so he thought it was inappropriate for them to go outside. He insisted Ashley's parents get out. Tension between the couple only increased after they left. The argument resurfaced in the bedroom after the guests had left, leaving Tom and Ashley alone. According to Tom, their argument stemmed from old grievances, but Ashley was adamant that she would live her life as she saw fit, regardless of what he thought. Tom claimed that her family had an influence on her. Tom claimed to have heard Ashley handling the gun stored beneath the mattress while he was getting into his pajamas and standing by the closet. Tom started to ask her what she was doing, but the shot went off before he could finish. On January 1, 2012, early in the morning, emergency personnel arrived on the scene. After Ashley's family made accusations, the police enlisted the help of Colorado Bureau of Investigation investigators. Jenna Fox and Joe Ridden, her parents, blamed Tom for the incident right away, pointing to his hostility and rage earlier that night. Ashley appeared to have committed suicide based on the evidence found at the scene, but investigators found information that cast doubt on the situation. Items strewn all over the floor and crooked picture frames on the walls suggested a potential struggle prior to the gunshot. Unsigned divorce documents discovered on a dresser appeared to support rumors of marital discord. An online dating site had brought Ashley and Tom together in the spring of 2007. Ashley was gregarious and energetic, and Tom fell in love with her right away. Their relationship progressed swiftly, and Ashley already had 2 daughters from a prior marriage. The couple married 2 weeks after the birth of their son, who was born a year after they first met. Ashley's daughters were adopted by Tom in 2010, and the family moved in together. But the family was becoming more tense by the end of 2011. Ashley's youngest son had just turned 3, and their 2 older daughters were 6 and 9 years old. The boy needed multiple surgeries after being diagnosed with hydrocephalus. Ashley, who was finding it difficult to manage her duties as a mother and the challenges in her marriage to Tom, was severely impacted by the stress of his illness. The tragic events of that New Year's Eve were predicated on the tense atmosphere created by these difficulties. Ashley Fallis was let go from her job at North Colorado Medical Center in 2010. Aggressive behavior was cited as the official reason, which was insubordination. Despite winning a settlement in her wrongful termination lawsuit, the legal victory did little to address her other issues. She had a brief affair with a high school sweetheart the following year, which made her already shaky marriage to Tom even more strained. At the same time, Ashley went to a psychiatrist for assistance. Since she was having up to 4 or 5 panic attacks a week, she was prescribed medication to lower her anxiety and stabilize her mood. Her relationship with Tom was severely strained as a result of these difficulties. Even though Tom knew about her affair, he decided against filing for divorce. Ashley herself created the divorce documents that investigators later discovered in their bedroom in 2009 when the couple was thinking about divorcing because of their divergent work schedules. But in the end, they made the decision to remain together and improve their relationship. According to Tom, their relationship had begun to improve in the months preceding the tragedy. He had found a stable job as a corrections officer with the Weld County Sheriff's Office. Ashley, meanwhile, discovered her own method of handling life's challenges. She started giving talks at conferences, offering support to other parents facing similar challenges, and sharing her experiences of raising a child with hydrocephalus. Ashley tested positive for pregnancy at home a few weeks prior to New Year's Eve. This was unexpected because she had been sterilized to avoid getting pregnant again after the birth of their youngest child. Ashley thought she might be pregnant in spite of the odds. She stopped taking her mood-stabilizing and anxiety medications to protect the unborn child. However, Ashley started her menstrual cycle just hours before guests arrived on December 31, 2011, the day of the party. She and Tom were devastated when a second pregnancy test revealed a negative result. A conversation about the possibility of trying to conceive another child and undoing the sterilization process had started that day. Years before, Ashley's mother had proposed the procedure, but now they had complete control over the choices. Tom and Ashley both stated that they would like to have another child, so the abrupt change in circumstances caused a great deal of emotional strain. All of this served as the background for what happened that night. Even though the day was emotionally taxing, the party at Ashley and Tom Fallis's house was exciting. Ashley tried her hardest to look happy. She danced, drank, and gave her loved ones hugs. Ashley appeared content and resilient, as she always did, according to her parents Joe and Jenna. It was difficult for them to accept that she would have voluntarily abandoned her family. However, Tom asserted that Ashley's family was unaware of the intense emotional struggles that were concealed behind her apparent composure. Tom's account of what happened that evening was carefully considered by investigators. He started his interview by narrating the events of the day, including how Ashley's decision to go outside with her family members escalated a minor argument and how the negative pregnancy test result had set the tone. Ashley's propensity to follow her mother's advice too frequently became the topic of the argument. Tom stated that he just wanted things to calm down and didn't want to argue anymore. Investigators observed scratches on Tom's neck and chest during his police interview. Given that they might have been signs of a struggle, these marks sparked suspicions. Tom clarified that the red marks were caused by him scratching his skin because he was itching after shaving his chest for the first time. He claimed that stress might have been the cause of the scratches on his neck. As the interview went on, the level of questioning increased. Tom insisted on his innocence because he believed he was being accused of a crime. He insisted that he wasn't in the room when the gun went off and that he didn't shoot Ashley. Investigators were inspecting the house and interviewing neighbors in the meantime. Chelsea Arriga, a neighbor, claimed to have heard Ashley yell, "Get off me," just prior to the gunshot. This story ran counter to what Tom had said. Tom denied that he ever made Ashley do anything against her will when investigators questioned him about the yelling. He clarified that he only requested that she cease following her mother's advice because it was straining their marriage. Investigators pressed him further, pointing out that Ashley was unlikely to have shot herself because of the wound on the back of her head. To prove his innocence, Tom insisted on having his hands tested for gunpowder residue. In order to ascertain whether Ashley was capable of firing the gun, he also demanded that her hands be examined. Because of the peculiar circumstances and contradicting evidence, investigators remained doubtful despite his explanations. Ashley Fallis was in the hospital, where medical professionals battled to save her life, while Tom was at the station. Unfortunately, they declared her dead a few hours after she was admitted. Tom was devastated to hear of her passing. After the incident, he said, he saw her breathing and thought she might have a chance to live when he held her in his arms. Despite not getting a confession from Tom after 3 hours of interrogation, investigators were unable to rule him out as a suspect. Tom grew more and more upset, insisting on his innocence and saying over and over that he could never hurt his wife. Ashley's death was declared a voluntary act 4 days after the incident. The medical examiner came to the conclusion that she killed herself, even though lab tests were not yet finished. Ashley's family was shocked and incredulous when the case was closed. They felt that the investigation was hurried and that Tom's employment in the county's correctional system had given him preferential treatment, which they felt affected the investigation's conclusion. It was challenging to demonstrate that Tom had any ties to the detectives working on the case, though, because of his employment with a different law enforcement organization that was unrelated to the investigation. Almost immediately, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation was called in to guarantee impartiality. However, errors were made. In contrast to standard procedure, Tom was not kept apart from possible witnesses at the scene. Furthermore, he did not cover his hands to protect any gunpowder residue that might have been important evidence. Tom's interrogation was handled poorly, according to Ashley's family, who felt that 3 hours was not enough time for the main person of interest in a case involving a suspicious death. They felt that until Ashley's parents, Jenna and Joe, pressed for it, investigators did not take Tom seriously as a suspect. Detectives changed their strategy only in response to their adamant demands. Even so, the investigation was only cursory. In the end, Tom was free to go. In order to be nearer to his sister, Tom relocated to Indiana after the tragedy, taking the kids with him. He seemed to be attempting to start over when he enrolled in college to obtain a bachelor's degree. Ashley's parents, Joe and Jenna, on the other hand, were uncompromising. They made a plea for justice to the media. They stressed that Ashley loved life and would never have voluntarily ended it, and they talked about Tom's short fuse in interviews. Nick Glover, a 17-year-old neighbor of the Fallis family, was a crucial new witness who was discovered by reporter Justin Joseph. Nick disclosed that he witnessed emergency vehicles pull up to the Fallis residence on January 1, 2012, while he was at home with friends. Additionally, Nick stated that he told Detective Michael Yates in an interview that he had heard Tom tell Ashley's parents, "I shot my wife." However, the police reports did not include a record of his statement. New accusations against law enforcement were sparked by the lack of documentation, which suggested potential corruption and a cover-up. Detective Yates was suspected of purposefully ignoring this crucial testimony in order to keep Tom safe. The Evans Police Department reopened the case in April 2014, over 2 years after Ashley's passing. According to new accusations, Yates had changed a witness's testimony and left out important evidence to bolster the story that Ashley had committed suicide. The investigation was carried out fairly, according to law enforcement officials, who denied any favoritism. Tom Fallis was taken into custody close to his Indiana home on November 18, 2014. He insisted on his innocence even after being accused of second-degree manslaughter. Many questions remained about the case, which had received a lot of public attention because of Justin Joseph's investigation. Ashley's leg bruises, for instance, raised questions about a flashlight that was discovered at the scene and possibly used during a fight. It was eventually discovered, however, that the flashlight was not connected to the crime and had belonged to an officer who had tried to administer first aid. According to the prosecution, Ashley kept a Taurus 9mm handgun under the mattress, which Tom took during a confrontation, put to her head, and then fired. After that, he called emergency services and lowered her body to the ground. Jenna Fox, Ashley's mother, testified during the trial that Tom had used harsh language and behaved aggressively during the New Year's Eve party, resulting in a fight. Tom refuted these claims. Jenna revealed later in the trial that there was a family history of mental health problems. Both Ashley's uncle and grandmother had committed suicide. This evidence was used by the prosecution to bolster their hypothesis that Ashley might have taken her own life voluntarily. Ashley's psychiatrist, however, stated in her testimony that she did not exhibit any symptoms of depression as of December 2011. Ashley was receiving overlapping prescriptions as a result of seeing 2 psychiatrists and a therapist concurrently, according to information later presented by the defense. Testimonies from forensic experts regarding the crime scene were inconsistent. Tom couldn't have shot his wife, according to Dan Gilliam, who had devoted hundreds of hours to examining the evidence. People who fire weapons in a fit of rage seldom stop after a single shot, Gilliam said. Gilliam was called as a witness by the prosecution, despite his findings. Jonathan Priest, another expert, visited the crime scene and went over the case materials. He deduced that Ashley had been in close proximity to Tom at the time of the shot. There would have been more blood all over the room, Priest thought, if Tom had been farther away. The chronology of when Tom arrived at Ashley and started helping, as recorded by the first responders, served as the basis for his analysis. This argument was used by the prosecution to refute the defense's assertions. Ashley's failed attempts to conceive, according to the prosecution, added to her emotional problems. Although she was not pregnant at the time of her death, an autopsy showed that she might have become pregnant following a tubal ligation. Ashley's emotional distress was exacerbated by reports that she thought she was pregnant 3 times in the 9 months before she passed away. The trial psychiatrists emphasized how these conditions could have had a substantial effect on her mental health. A key component of the prosecution's case, particularly after Nick's friend Chelsea Origo provided her own account, was Nick Glover's testimony that he overheard Tom tell his parents, "I shot my wife," the night Ashley Fallis died. Chelsea also reportedly heard Ashley yelling, "Get off me!" according to Nick's mother, Kathy. However, Chelsea said during the trial that she was too drunk to remember the argument distinctly. Nick, however, emphasized that such a confession was unforgettable and insisted that he remembered everything that happened that night. Investigators took notice of his claims, and Detective Michael Yates, who had spoken with Nick the day Ashley died, was subject to internal review for neglecting to record this purported confession. Yates insisted that Nick had never said such a thing to him, but the investigation revealed no wrongdoing on his part. Defense lawyers pointed out various contradictions in Nick Glover's testimony during his cross-examination. They noted that Nick kept up a cordial relationship with Tom following his purported confession, taking part in family events like Christmas celebrations and camping excursions. Nick gave the same response more than 90 times when asked why he behaved in this manner. "I don't remember." Chris Graves, a former deputy for the Weld County Sheriff's Office, later came forward and said he had heard Tom confess. The defense cited contradictions in Graves's story, claiming that when he arrived at the scene he heard Tom yelling, "I can't believe I shot her, I can't believe she's dead," despite the fact that the crime scene was packed with neighbors, family members, and law enforcement officers. Nobody else claimed to have heard Tom's alleged outburst. Additionally, Graves did not arrest Tom on the spot, stating that it was outside of his authority. The defense also pointed out that for 3 years after the incident, Chris Graves had not submitted any reports regarding his statements. His credibility was further damaged when he was later fired for dishonesty from the sheriff's office. These elements call into question the prosecution's story. The prosecution's theory was also not supported by a large number of tangible pieces of evidence. Tests for gunshot residue on Ashley's 2 hands revealed residue, but tests on Tom's hands revealed no traces. Neither nail scrapings from Ashley nor scratches on Tom's chest, which could have been signs of a struggle, contained any evidence of Ashley's DNA. The idea that the couple had a physical altercation prior to the shot being fired was seriously called into question by these findings. In his own defense, Tom Fallis declined to testify. Over 40 witnesses were called to testify during the trial, which lasted for several weeks. Ashley's mental health and the major obstacles she had encountered in the months before her death, repeated pregnancy tests, her son's illness, prescription drugs, losing her job, and having an affair, were the main topics of the defense's closing arguments. The defense argues that these elements may have played a role in the tragedy. Ashley's purported farewell letters were introduced during the trial, which was a startling development. She wrote that she could no longer live, called herself a failure, and apologized to Tom in these letters. Since they were only made aware of these letters years after Ashley's passing, her family questioned their veracity. According to her family, they thought the letters were fake, and had never seen any indication that Ashley might have written them. The jury deliberated for 3.5 hours, including an hour for lunch, before rendering its decision. Tom Fallis was acquitted of all charges, including second-degree manslaughter. Ashley's family was devastated by the decision. Jenna Fox and Joe Ridden, her parents, were adamant about Tom's guilt and sued the Evans Police Department, alleging that investigators had fabricated or hidden evidence. They contended that other officers who may have heard Tom's purported confession stayed silent and that Nick Glover's 2012 testimony had been disregarded. In the end, their cases were dropped. Ashley's family remained adamant about Tom's guilt and insisted on accepting the acquittal. Nevertheless, they were able to keep up a relationship with the kids and obtain visitation rights that let them continue to be active in their lives. As he works to rebuild his life and further his education, Tom Fallis is still struggling financially as a result of legal fees. Tom continued to look after the children after the tragedy. To start over and be nearer to his sister, he relocated them to a different state. He informed them that their mother had died in an accident, but he would like to give them more information when they are older. The case is still cloaked in mystery despite every attempt to find the truth. Doubt seems to grow with each response, and questions persist. Ashley Fallis' story is one of those instances where it becomes difficult to distinguish between truth and deceit, leaving only suspicion and unsolved mysteries in its wake. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. This video examines what happened in Tennessee, USA on September 2, 2022, when 34-year-old Eliza Fletcher, a mother of 2 children and kindergarten teacher, left her Memphis home to go for a morning jog. Following police notification of Eliza's disappearance, an investigation was started after she failed to return home, which sparked a significant public outcry. A few days ago, the case was concluded. Born in Memphis, Tennessee, on November 9, 1987, Eliza Welford Fletcher played soccer for the University of Memphis after graduating from Hutchinson School in 2006 and went on to finish her undergraduate studies at Baylor University. After graduating from Belmont University with a master's degree in teaching, she focused her efforts and unending youthful enthusiasm on her students at Promise Academy and then St. Mary's Episcopal School's junior kindergartners. Eliza gave her all to her students, as she did to everything she did. She was a firm believer in the value of personal development and did not hesitate to show vulnerability. As a natural athlete, on the other hand, she welcomed it. From childhood teams to collegiate competition to winning marathons, Eliza's love of sports was evident. As an adult, she loved going for morning runs with her friends. She enthusiastically participated in everything she did by utilizing her competitive nature. Eliza was a skilled runner who qualified for the Boston Marathon, a prestigious event among marathon runners, by finishing the Stone Marathon in Memphis in 3 hours, 26 minutes, and 9 seconds. Eliza loved being a wife and mother more than anything else. Richard James Fletcher, her husband, and she met at the Second Presbyterian Church. On Friday, September 2, 2022, the couple welcomed 2 sons into the world after getting married on March 8, 2014. When Eliza did not return from her jog at the scheduled time, her family became concerned. Her husband Richard reported her missing at 7:45 a.m. after noticing that she had not returned home and was not returning calls or texts. Eliza began her day the same way she began many other days, with a morning run. She left the house at around 4 a.m. Police started looking into it right away. The investigators first spoke with every member of Eliza's family. In addition to ensuring that the family members' testimonies were consistent, they had to piece together the timeline of events preceding her disappearance. Eliza's husband, or any other family member's involvement in the disappearance, was promptly ruled out by authorities. Investigators retraced Eliza's route and started gathering surveillance footage after determining which route she was running. A still photo of Eliza was made public. She weighs 137 pounds, has blonde hair, green eyes, and is 5 feet 6 inches tall. Her hair was in a bun on the day she was last spotted, and she was dressed in a pink jogging top and purple-blue running shorts. Investigators concluded that Eliza had been abducted close to the University of Memphis. Eliza used to frequently jog in the area and had never experienced any personal safety concerns. But this time, police claimed that a man kidnapped her, forced her into his car, and drove off. The suspect was driving west on Central Avenue in a dark SUV. It was discovered that Eliza's cell phone was broken. Near the scene of her kidnapping, a water bottle and a phone were discovered. An image of the SUV was made public, and police urged anyone with information that could aid in the investigation to get in touch with them. Some information regarding the kidnapping was later made public by authorities. What the police report says about it is as follows. A black GMC Terrain was seen driving by and then waiting for the victim to run by on the scene's security footage. The document claims that a man got out of the vehicle, rushed over to Fletcher, and pushed her into the passenger seat. This kidnapping seemed to involve some sort of struggle. This is where the Champion Slide sandals were discovered. Sandals discovered at the scene were sent to a lab where specialists were to test them for a sample of the offender's DNA. The car then sat in the parking lot with the victim inside for about 4 minutes before it drove away. In a statement released on September 3, the day following the kidnapping, Eliza's family offered a $50,000 reward for information leading to Eliza's return. Police were looking for the dark SUV in the meantime. They discovered additional surveillance footage, some of which was subsequently made public. The police statement claims that this video shows the suspect in Eliza Fletcher's kidnapping cleaning the inside of his vehicle. It is clear from the statement that Eliza was no longer in the kidnapper's car at this point, but authorities did find a trash can where the suspect had disposed of the cleaning supplies he had used inside the vehicle. They might be an important piece of proof. The same day, September 3, Memphis police reported that they had found a car of interest and had taken its driver into custody to question him. The DNA sample came from the sandals the criminal misplaced when kidnapping Eliza Fletcher. Upon entering the DNA profile into the database, forensics discovered that the person who kidnapped Eliza was 38-year-old Cleotha Abston. He was released from prison approximately 2 years ago and had a criminal record. Investigators allegedly found that Abston's cell phone was close to the location where Fletcher was coerced into the car, based on cellular records they were able to obtain. Abston was a teenager when he pleaded guilty to kidnapping Kemper Durand on May 26, 2000, and was previously given a sentence of 24 years in prison. According to court records, Abston forced Durand into a car's trunk after kidnapping him at gunpoint. In a victim impact statement, Durand stated that he felt incredibly fortunate that I was able to escape from the custody of Cletty Abston. He then made Durand take money out of an ATM, from which he managed to escape when he caught the attention of a Memphis Housing Authority guard. He and his co-defendant had taken me from the trunk of my car, where they had kept me for several hours, and forced me to drive to the MAPCO station. I was supposed to get cash for Cleotha Abstain using my ATM card. We were extremely lucky that a Memphis Housing Authority guard in an armed uniform just so happened to enter the MAPCO station. It is very likely that I would have been killed if I hadn't escaped, he wrote in the statement. Durand, a criminal defense attorney who passed away in 2013, stated that he thought Abston had no remorse at all. Additionally, according to court records, Abston had a long criminal history beginning in 1995. The charges included rape, theft, aggravated assault, and evading arrest. Although the kidnapper was apprehended, Eliza Fletcher's whereabouts were unknown due to Abston's silence after his release from the Tennessee Department of Correction in November 2020. Regretfully, evidence discovered in his vehicle showed that Eliza had passed away. Forensics discovered traces of Eliza's blood in his SUV, despite the fact that Abstat had cleaned the interior thoroughly. Abston was accused of both evidence tampering and kidnapping. In addition, he was accused of unrelated crimes like credit card fraud, property theft, and identity theft. According to police, the judge set bail at $500,000 at the time of arraignment. A public defender was assigned after Abston informed the judge that he could not afford an attorney. Police were searching for Eliza in the meantime. On the morning of Friday, September 2, she was kidnapped. Authorities confirmed the worst fears of those concerned about Eliza Fletcher's fate at a press conference on Monday, September 5, 2022. The body of Eliza was discovered in the grass close to this deserted Victor Street home. The driveway contained tire tracks that matched those on Abstin's vehicle. This is how this location appears on news reports, however, indicate that this abandoned house was encircled by tall grass at the time of the crime. The grass was as tall as a man in some places, making it an excellent place to conceal the crime's evidence. Journalists started asking locals if they had seen anything suspicious after Eliza's body was discovered here. According to some of the people the journalists spoke with, even before Eliza's body was discovered, they called City Hall several times to request that the grass be mowed. However, after Eliza's body was discovered, the city authorities did nothing. Abstin was also charged with first-degree murder and first-degree murder in the commission of kidnapping, and the judge revoked the $500,000 bail that had been set when he was first charged. The judge also decided that Henderson would be accepted as the suspect's legal last name. Since his name is listed as Cleotha Abstin in the prosecutor's reports as well, I will use that name going forward. Just to let you know, he is listed as Claretha Henderson in some sources. Following the proceedings, Shelby County District Attorney Steve Mulroy sidestepped a reporter's inquiry about the punishment he would seek in the event that Abstin was found guilty. A conviction for first-degree murder carries a life sentence, with or without parole, or the death penalty. It is too soon for us to talk about the kind of punishment we will pursue. Outside the courtroom, Mulroy stated that Eliza's family and everyone who knew her were shocked by her untimely death. 5 days after the police announced the body's discovery, on September 10, 2022, hundreds of people attended the funeral service, which took place in the same church where Eliza had been married 8 years prior. Nobody is prepared for the loss of a loved one, but it is a terrible experience to learn that they were murdered after being kidnapped. People's mental health suffers as a result of their inability to accept the devastating reality. It's time to honor those who loved her so much, and to remember and celebrate how unique she was. We are grateful for all of the love and care that we have received. We are incredibly appreciative of the local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies' tireless efforts to locate Eliza and apprehend the perpetrator of this heinous crime. According to Eliza's family, this senseless loss has left us devastated and heartbroken. Family, friends, co-workers, students, parents, members of her Second Presbyterian Church congregation, and everyone else who knew her loved Eliza. According to the statement, the faculty and staff at St. Mary's Episcopal School lit candles in Eliza's honor as the day began in chapel. On September 9, 20th, 2000, 200 people came together to finish the marathon that Eliza had left unfinished, according to a Facebook post from the school. In remembrance of Eliza, who was kidnapped at around the same time, they began running at 4:20 a.m. We're just here today to run in honor of Eliza and to demonstrate that women in this city have the right to run at 4 in the morning or 10 at night, said event organizer Danielle Heineman. Any time of day or night, Eliza's supporters jogged, ran, and walked in her honor while dressed in vibrant hues. They held that women had the freedom to go out whenever they pleased and were not required to completely cover their bodies. The 34-year-old mother of two and teacher passed away from a single gunshot wound to the head, per the autopsy report. 2 semicircular skull defects are consistent with a single gunshot wound to the head, with the bullet moving from right to left, back to front, and posterior to anterior. According to the report, a shell casing was found close to where her body was found, despite the fact that no projectile was recovered from her body. Eliza sustained blunt force injuries, such as fractures to her jaw and bruises on her right thigh, in addition to the gunshot wound. Although there was no overt indication of an actual assault, these injuries were consistent with blunt force trauma. It was discovered that Cleotha Abstin had abused another woman the year prior to his abduction of Eliza, as the authorities readied themselves for the trial. The attack on Eliza Fletcher might have been avoided if Abstin had been taken into custody, but the system failed because of inadequate funding, and Abstin was still at large. The incident in question took place on September 21, 2021. The woman, Alicia Franklin, went to the police and said that she and Abstin had agreed to have dinner after meeting on a dating app in 2021. Alicia Franklin claims that although they had previously talked about trading love for money, they had no intention of having intimate contact that evening. Instead, he put a gun to her neck and dragged her into his car, where he made her comply with his wishes despite her objections. Alicia called the police after Abstin released her. Despite the fact that samples of male DNA were discovered, Police reports stated that she had no visible injuries. How much time did it take to analyze these DNA samples, in your opinion? The test results were released on September 5, 2022, nearly a year after the incident, which took place on September 21, 2021. When state leaders and victim advocates learned that Abston had been arrested for Eliza Fletcher's murder, they became indignant and demanded that officials change the way the state handles assault kits. There is still more to be done, but I am happy that we are able to take this extra step towards clearing this backlog. Tennessee Governor Bill Lee apologized and stated that authorities would expedite additional funds to hire 25 additional staff at the forensic lab to speed up the process of testing samples. According to Senate Speaker Randy McNally, we have to get these violent criminals off the streets and keep them off. Jim Strickland, the mayor of Memphis, has publicly defended the actions of the Memphis Police Department. Strickland responded, "I don't know the details," when asked if MPD blew the investigation. The investigation is ongoing. The mayor shouldn't get involved in the investigation's minutiae. Days after his arrest in connection with Eliza Fletcher's death, Cleotha Abston was finally charged in the case. Alicia Franklin is suing the city of Memphis, claiming that the Memphis Police Department did not conduct a thorough and appropriate investigation into her ordeal. She claimed to have sustained emotional and physical harm that necessitated continuous medical and psychological care. She is requesting damages that are not specified. Additionally, the lawsuit alleges that when investigators arrived at the crime scene, they failed to collect tangible evidence. The Lakes at Ridgeway were also sued by Alicia Franklin. The woman said that because there was no security at the apartment complex, Abston was able to take her to an unoccupied apartment and attack her. She claimed that the attack on her was not the first crime to occur in that vacant apartment, and she is suing for $2 million in damages. The apartment that Abston used to entice the plaintiff to leave her car was unoccupied and available for Abston to use illegally, the lawsuit said. In the court filing, the woman also claimed that Henderson had made inappropriate and obscene remarks to other women at the complex, but the property managers had done nothing to request that Abston leave. In the Alicia Franklin case, Cleotha Abston was found guilty on April 12, 2024. He consented to a maximum sentence of 8 decades in prison on all counts on May 17, 2024, waiving his right to a sentencing hearing. The sentence is divided into 40 years for the 20 years for the kidnapping and 20 years for the gun charge, which will run consecutively. When making a decision, said Judge Lee Coffey, the judge said that Abston will not be able to appeal his sentence, but he can still appeal the trial and verdict itself in the Franklin case this week. On Monday, October 28, 2024, it was revealed that Cleotha Abston was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole in the Eliza Fletcher case. He also noted that the sentence would run consecutively for the counts he considered, including his lengthy criminal history and multiple disciplinary incidents while he was in custody, including indecent exposures and possessing drugs and weapons. The man accused of the violent kidnapping and murder of Memphis schoolteacher and mother of 2, Eliza Fletcher, entered a guilty plea to several charges, including first-degree murder, aggravated kidnapping, and tampering with evidence, according to a statement issued today by the district attorney's office. The case that has rocked the community was officially ended when Cleotha Abston was given a life sentence without the possibility of parole. With the help of Mrs. Fletcher's family, the resolution was reached. The agreement reached today gives the family closure. In order to avoid years and decades of appeals, the defendant forfeits his right to appeal. The fact that this dangerous individual will never again walk our streets benefits the community as well. In prison, he will perish. Due to the overwhelming evidence against him, Abston's attorney, Uni Ganguly, told the New York Times that he advised Abston to accept the plea deal. A jury probably would have given Abston the death penalty, Ganguly told the Times. A statement from Fletcher's family that was sent directly to Abston was read by District Attorney Steve Mulroy. "We don't know what happened to you, but whatever it was that made you feel the need to harm people doesn't justify or explain what you did. Nothing will ever be the same because of the permanent change you have brought about in our lives. What you did was wicked. There is no other way to put it. You killed Liza, despite the fact that she did nothing wrong and did not harm you. If you had needed assistance, she would have been the first to offer it. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. We'll talk about what happened in Everett, Washington, on September 20, 2017 at 1:55 a.m., when multiple people called 911 after hearing loud explosions as soon as the police showed up. They discovered a horrifying image on the doorstep 10 minutes later. Directly outside the door was Alicia Canales McGuire, 24. Sadly, she had already passed away. Thanks to CCTV footage and social media, investigators were able to solve this tragic case. Alicia was born on October 29, 1992, in Mount Vernon, Washington, to Manuel and Michelle Canales. She spent a significant amount of her adult life working as a caregiver because she enjoyed caring for others and always wanted to assist everyone. Raised on a farm, Alicia began working at the age of 5. She frequently went back to assist on the family farm because she understood the importance of hard work. Alicia loved spending time with her family, and she saw and talked to them often, always remembering to say "I love you" when she said goodbye. She and her spouse, Bradley, resided in Bird's View. In July 2017, Alicia and Brad tied the knot in a stunning beach ceremony at Deception Pass. As a result, investigators quickly discovered that Alicia did not reside in the home where she passed away. It belonged to her sister, Amanda Canales, who shared it with her 3 kids. Amanda asked Alicia to watch her kids while she was away because she had to travel to New York for work. Alicia was glad to assist because she loved her nephew and nieces. 2 months prior, she had tied the knot and was eager to begin a family of her own. One of the people who called 911 was the stay-in nanny who was in the house with her. When she went downstairs after hearing gunshots, she discovered Alicia motionless and lying at the front door. When the police officers got to the scene, they looked at the house first. They had to see if the criminal was inside. They made sure that the only people in the house were Amanda's kids and the nanny. By closely inspecting everything, the police began searching for evidence after the terrified kids were removed from the house. The house had a car parked in front of it. Beside it were shell casings. It indicated that the person who shot Alicia was standing close to the vehicle, just in front of the front door. The door frame was struck by several bullets. Just outside the door, Alicia was lying face down. It did not appear to be a robbery. The house was not a mess. Furthermore, it appeared that the criminal had not even gone inside the house. However, why and by whom would someone wish to kill Alicia? The detectives suspected that it was a case of mistaken identity after learning that it was her sister's home. The investigators questioned Amanda, who may have been the target, but she was in New York when the nanny, who was also present in the house when the crime was committed, relaxed. They inquired as to whether she knew who would want to harm her or if she saw the person who shot Alicia. The nanny claimed that when she heard gunfire, she was upstairs. She noticed that Alicia was motionless and face down on the floor when she looked down. She called 911 because she was afraid and didn't see the person who had shot Alicia, the nanny. As far as she was aware, she told investigators, Alicia and her husband Bradley got along well, but she provided the first important lead to the police. According to her, there were issues between Amanda, Alicia's sister, and her former spouse, Kevin Lewis. The detectives discovered from looking through the local sheriff's office reports that this was not the first time the police had been called to this address. Every incident had something to do with family disputes between Amanda and Kevin Lewis. The detectives were therefore intrigued by this version. Kevin Lewis lived in a different area of Everett, so they located his home address and went there before dawn to speak with him. It was dark in his home. During the conversation, Kevin answered the door when they knocked. "Talk to Lewis." "She should be home," he said in response to the officer's question about his ex-wife's whereabouts. He appeared to have just awoken. He was asked to tell the detectives where he had slept. He claimed that his mother and sister could verify that he had spent the entire night at home. When the detectives told him that there had been a shooting in the home where his children lived, he didn't inquire as to why they were there. It was odd that he didn't show any emotion. He should have inquired about his children's well-being as a parent, but he chose not to do so. Kevin looked shocked and said, Really, that was the end of our conversation? When the detectives informed him that Amanda had been out of town on business. While strolling down the street, the detectives noticed that 2 nearby homes had security cameras that they could use to verify Kevin Lewis's story. He said that instead of going out, he spent the entire night at home. However, after reviewing the video, the investigators discovered that approximately 40 minutes prior to the assault on Alicia, a car was pulling up alongside Kevin's driveway. Then someone who looked a lot like Kevin came out the front door, approached this car, and got in. The vehicle drove off a short while later. The quality of the recording prevented the police from conclusively identifying Kevin as the next victim. The footage was seen by the investigators from a different camera. Despite being able to examine the car more closely, they were unable to identify it. They could only make out that the car was light in color. About 20 minutes later, they saw the car return after fast-forwarding the recording. But they had one important detail to notice. This car's front right rim was different from the other 3. The front right rim was dark, while the other 3 were light. Kevin Lewis, who was in the first recording, got out of the car and went back to his house when the car came to a stop close to it. Approximately 20 minutes prior to the 911 calls regarding a shooting, this man, whoever he was, entered the house. The car then drove off and never came back. The drive from Kevin's house to Amanda's was 15 minutes. This could indicate that the car had enough time to reach Amanda's house, or it could indicate that the car was unrelated to the shooting. It was too soon to say. Amanda learned of her sister's passing. She was in New York a few hours later when their father called to inform them that Alicia had passed away. Alicia married, was content, and hoped to start a family of her own, but now her family had to grieve for her. Amanda said she had no doubt that her ex-husband Kevin was the one who shot Alicia when the investigators asked her if she believed he could have done it. Amanda Canales wasn't prepared to publicly acknowledge how toxic her relationship with her ex had been, even after her 8-year marriage ended. Despite having 3 young children, 2 girls and a boy, and spending 10 years with Kevin Lewis, Amanda had been extremely unhappy and continued to live in fear of him even after their June 2017 divorce. Amanda had been bruised by Lewis's previous physical abuse, and even after they had parted ways, he continued to threaten her. Amanda was granted full custody of their children in August 2017. Lewis was ordered to pay $800 a month in lieu of child support. For Amanda, it was a new beginning. As a single mother, she was grateful for the support she received from her family and concentrated on her home in Everett, Washington. Amanda was threatened by Kevin. He threatened to kill her. He had the training because he had served in the military. Although her sister passed away, Amanda thought she was the one who had been attacked. Rather, she even obtained a restraining order against Kevin, which he repeatedly broke. Amanda and their 3 kids were both terrified when he wandered outside her house and peered in the windows. Kevin was not charged by the police with any of the restraining order violations. Amanda was returning home late at night and parked in the driveway next to her house when she was brutally beaten as she got out of her car a few weeks prior to her sister's death. Someone attacked her as soon as she opened her car door. She didn't have time to see the attacker's face because everything happened so quickly, but given everything, she was certain that Kevin Lewis, 30, was responsible for Alicia Canales McGuire's death. The investigators thought he was planning to kill his ex-wife. At the time, Kevin was unaware that she was in New York. He was unaware that Alicia had been asked by Amanda to watch her kids while she was away. Today, though, this version contained an error. Kevin would have been at his house when the shooting occurred, if the man in the video was indeed him. He was also given an alibi by his mother and sister. As a result, the police kept looking into the incident and took into account various theories. After going back to Amanda's house to take another look at everything and analyzing the bullet trajectory, experts came to the conclusion that Alicia was shot while the door was partially open and that the shooter fired at least 7 shots that entered the house from the outside. According to the evidence found at the scene, someone fired a shot while standing next to the garage, then proceeded to the house's door and fired once more inside. Multiple gunshot wounds to the head and torso were determined by the medical examiner to be the cause of Elisa's death. She was hit by 5 shots. There were gunpowder stippling injuries in 2 of the wounds. The last 2 gunshot wounds to the head were most likely the last 2 wounds administered, according to the medical examiner, who testified that he was unable to ascertain the order of the 5 shots. The 7 shell casings discovered at the crime scene were fired from the same firearm, the experts concluded. Alicia was shot at close range, resulting in head injuries. After examining this version, the investigators were unable to locate any proof to support this. Due to the rarity of this particular brand of shell casings, the police were also interested in the ones discovered at the crime scene. These casings were produced in Russia and sold under the Tulimo name. The investigators hoped to identify the seller of these cartridges and possibly the buyer because the brand was not very popular. The investigators found that this brand of cartridges was sold by Walmart. The crime scene was close to one of these shops. Walmart representatives informed the detectives that they had CCTV footage showing a man paying for 9mm Tulimo cartridges that he had recently purchased. The detectives went straight to Walmart to view the video. They thought Kevin Lewis might be the buyer when they made the recording on September 18, 2 days before Alicia passed away, but they were mistaken. The police now knew the identity of the man in the video, who wasn't Kevin, because he used a credit card to make the purchase. When the investigators looked into this man, they discovered no relationship to the nanny, Alicia Amanda, or Kevin Lewis. They now had to find fresh evidence. The investigators looked through every version that was available at the time before turning to Amanda for fresh details about Kevin. They had a good relationship at first, she said. Kevin was restrained in his behavior during the honeymoon. She didn't anticipate that he would start hitting her and grow more hostile over time. After their relationship ended, Amanda was granted full custody of the children, a restraining order was issued, and they got divorced. However, a distraught Amanda was aware that Alicia wasn't supposed to be killed in the shooting and thought it was a case of mistaken identity. She told police that Lewis had somehow planned the attack and that Kevin was home when it happened. The footage from the night of Alicia's death has been examined by the investigators once more. They saw something now that they had never seen before. The man who left his house, Kevin, can be seen approaching the car and settling into the back seat behind the driver in this grainy video. Why, though, did he not take the front passenger seat? As the investigators searched for a solution, they came to the conclusion that someone else was already occupying the front passenger seat. As a result, by the time the car arrived at Kevin Lewis's house, there were most likely 2 people inside, which may have been the reason he had to take the back seat. There was insufficient evidence for the police to connect Kevin to Alicia's demise. But after gathering proof of Kevin's assaults on his ex-wife Amanda, they detained him in November 2018 and gave him a 3-year prison sentence. In the meantime, Alicia's case was still unresolved over a year after her death. The only break in this case came in 2019 when a woman with crucial information called the police station. A girl from nearby Spokane who had attended a party and boasted about being hired to kill someone on York Road, the street where Alicia was shot, was the source of the detective's tip. Given that Spokane was roughly 5 hours away from Everett, the police were unsure of what to believe. According to the caller, she was at a party when a young woman walked in. Angelica is who she is. The latter boasted about her involvement in the crime with her boyfriend. This woman claims that Angelica stated that a person died as a result of being shot in the head. They were hired to shoot from around the corner by the children's father. Additionally, according to Angelica, they killed the wrong person. A case of mistaken identity was involved in the incident. The specifics of this case have never been made public by the police. Alicia's head injury was only known to the investigators and her family. Angelica's knowledge of numerous details about the crime piqued the police's interest as they searched for her. Her true name, Alexis Hale, was discovered by the investigators. On her social media, they discovered pictures of her brandishing a 9mm handgun. It might have been the crime's weapon. Additionally, there were multiple videos with a man in the background. It was Jaredon Phelps, Alexis's boyfriend. Alexis Hale shared a video taken through a car's windshield that examined the road signs the night before Alicia passed away. The investigators were able to pinpoint the precise location of the car at that time, which was roughly 10 minutes away from Kevin Lewis's home. A few hours after Alicia's passing, Jaredon Phelps boasted about a wad of cash in the video below. One of the 5 comments that the investigators saw on Phelps's social media photo was from his aunt. They identified his aunt as Kevin Lewis's mother after clicking on her social media profile. As it happened, Kevin's cousin was Marital Phelps. The police had good reason to make an arrest. Alexis Hale was the first to be placed in handcuffs. She screamed and claimed that because she was only 17 years old, the police were unable to arrest her. She demanded a lawyer because she understood why she had been arrested. Marital Phelps was taken into custody by the police in a different area of the city at the same time. Phelps and Hale had driven from Spokane to Everett to carry out the shooting, according to the investigators' phone records. Additionally, early on September 20, Lewis's neighbor's security footage captured someone getting into a car. At 1:13 a.m. EM, the man in the white top departed, and at 1:37 a.m. he returned. Following Alicia's passing, Lewis was wearing a white top when the police visited him. Alexis kept everything from the investigators. At the time, Kevin Lewis was serving a 3-year prison sentence for assaulting Amanda. As a result, the researchers were hoping that Phelps would provide some information. The investigators suspected it was Kevin Lewis, and now the police had a confession and the name of the man who hired Hale and Phelps. Phelps provided them with additional information about the crime when they brought him to the scene. Following Alicia Canales McGuire's death in September 2017, Kevin Lewis, who was already incarcerated on an unrelated charge, was charged with aggravated murder with a firearm, conspiracy to commit murder, and solicitation to commit murder in July 2020. At the age of 20, he entered a guilty plea to first-degree premeditated murder. He was given a 31-year prison sentence by the court. At age 18, Hale entered a guilty plea to the same charge and received a 15-year sentence. During the trial, Phelps testified that he had committed the crime for financial gain and to gain notoriety. Lewis gave Phelps money, which he used to purchase a Ferragamo belt buckle, Timberland boots, and some tattoos. He asserted that he had given his ex-girlfriend $200 after she obtained the pistol from a family member. Later that year, Lewis entered a not guilty plea and was put on trial by the prosecution. Claimed that in order to get his ex-wife out of the way, he had given $2,400 to his cousin and his girlfriend. Although he had made them into adolescent killers, Alicia had unintentionally opened the door in a tragic case of mistaken identity. Lewis gave Phelps an envelope of cash on the way back. Phelps said Lewis had led them to the house, but that he didn't know who the target was. Phelps and Hale dropped Lewis back at his house and then went back to the spot Lewis had indicated. After getting out of the car, the two headed for the house. Hale went to knock on the front door and Phelps stopped beside the garage. Hale left as soon as Alicia opened the front door, and Phelps fired the gun until it was empty. The gun's muzzle crossed the threshold as Phelps fired the first few shots from his position close to the garage, and the final two after approaching the front porch. The final 2 shots were directed at the head and neck region. Phelps and Hale returned in their vehicle because of a glove that might have been left at the scene. They turned around and departed when they saw police cars upon their return. After getting GPS directions, they returned to Spokane by car. The defense contended that Lewis had only said to move the target out of the way and had never used the word kill in his conversation with his cousin. However, the court was reminded by the prosecution of Kevin's violent past and his threats against Amanda. They claimed that power and control are at the heart of this case, and it was obvious what the goal was. Amanda described him as pure evil. He had played with their kids, who were in the house when she was supposed to die, she remembered incredulously. I assumed you loved them, but a person who truly cares for someone would never want to put them in danger or cause them any trauma. Did you care that they would have woken up to find their own mother dead, lying in a pool of blood, if it had been just me home that night? She asked. She also discussed finding her kids a safe place to live. She informed Louis that, in spite of all the harm you caused, they are recovering and moving on. In case you were wondering, they never inquire about or discuss you. The jury found Lewis guilty of first-degree murder in less than 3.5 hours after a 6-week trial in November 2021. In January 2022, 34 Kevin was given a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Records show that Lewis is still incarcerated at the Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla County, where Judge Thompson also ordered him to have no contact with his former wife, his children, Phelps, or Hale for the remainder of his life. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments, What part of this story shocked you the most? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Bryce Rhodes, 25, is the man you just saw on the screen. He acts in a reprehensible manner and shows no remorse or guilt for his actions. He is charged with the murders of two brothers, 14-year-old Larry Ordway and 16-year-old Maurice Gordon, whose bodies were found after the authorities were alerted by a disturbing 911 call. Elizabeth Wren, their mother, was devastated by the news, and her entire world fell apart. However, the horrific manner in which her sons were murdered only served to exacerbate the suffering. Before their bodies were burned, they were repeatedly stabbed in the chest. The police had to stop Elizabeth from seeing her sons for the final time because it was so graphic. However, why would anyone commit such a heinous act? Bryce claims that the boys were aware of a secret of his that could endanger his life. What might that secret be? And why would it cause two young lives to end so horribly? And why did Bryce act so reprehensibly in front of the police? On the 4000 block of River Park Drive in the Shawnee neighborhood of West Louisville, on May 21, 2016, a 22-year-old girl was riding her bike past an old abandoned building. However, that day was different because she noticed something odd. The structure, which had appeared fine the day before, was now completely destroyed by fire. Curious about what had actually transpired there, she made the decision to look into it more. She noticed an odd shape that didn't seem to belong in the ruins of the burned-out building. Her heart raced with terror as she approached and realized it was a dead body. The surprises didn't stop there, though. She discovered another body nearby, both of them severely burned. She immediately called the police for assistance because she was so terrified. Police officers were soon swarming the scene, attempting to determine what enigmatic events had transpired there the previous evening. The police described the crime scene as the most horrific they had ever seen because it was so graphic. Even one of the officers felt so moved and compelled to shake his head in shock as he covered the two dead bodies with a white cloth because it was so unsettling. Pathologists hurried the bodies to the hospital for an autopsy. The remaining officers, meanwhile, remained at the scene and cautiously looked for any additional hints that might aid in their investigation. Following the autopsies, it was discovered that something even more heinous was the cause of death rather than the fire. A document made public by the coroner's office stated that both boys had been stabbed in the chest and had suffered severe blunt force trauma to their heads. The fact that they had already passed away hours before their bodies were burned and abandoned at the scene makes it even more horrifying. The police now had to identify the boys and determine why someone would hurt them in such a horrible way before they could start their murder investigation and collect evidence. The police were fortunate to be able to draw sketches of the boys despite the fact that the bodies were severely burned. The public was given access to these sketches along with an appeal for anyone who might be able to identify them to come forward. However, they went beyond simple sketches. Unfortunately, they were unable to locate any missing persons reports that had been filed a few days prior and that fit the victims' descriptions after searching through their records. Despite Monday coming and going, no one came forward to identify the boys, and days went by. Elizabeth Wren, a worried woman, hurried to the police station the next day, May 23, 2016, when she informed the officers that the sketches they had made public featured her sons, 14-year-old Larry Ordway and 16-year-old Maurice Gordon. She was clearly nervous. When the officers broke the devastating news that her sons' bodies had been discovered fully burned, Elizabeth was taken aback. She was informed by the police that they suspected foul play and thought the murder was a well-planned one rather than a simple accident. The officers had to politely turn down Elizabeth's fervent wish to see her sons one last time. It would not have been suitable for a mother to see the bodies in such a terrible condition. Even though she felt completely powerless, Elizabeth mustered the courage to share an important piece of information. When Elizabeth spoke with the police, she described how her sons had told her that they were going out with some friends she had never liked on the evening of May 21, 2016. In the past, she'd tried to stop her sons from spending time with these friends, but they continued to do so. They went to a party that evening with 3 people, 25-year-old Bryce Rhodes, 15-year-old Anjuan Carter, and 17-year-old Ja'Cory Taylor. Elizabeth voiced her worries about Bryce, who had a concerning criminal record that included a number of serious crimes, including physical assault, domestic abuse, kidnapping, and even abuse. Elizabeth didn't worry too much because the boys assured her they would return soon, despite the fact that days had gone by with no sign of them. They would frequently go out to parties and not return home for days at a time. Therefore, she assumed it was just another instance of that kind. She had no idea, though, that this time would bring heartbreaking news that would permanently alter her life. The entire group was quickly located by the police. Angelin Carter was promptly located and taken in for interrogation. They kept looking for Bryce in the meantime, and by Tuesday, May 24, 2016, they had also found him. In a brief period of time, Ja'Cory Taylor, another group member, was also captured that same day. While Bryce and Ja'Cory spoke separately with detectives regarding Larry and Maurice, they were detained by the police for hours. In an attempt to elicit information about the killings, the detectives showed Ja'Cory pictures of the two brothers' crime scenes in an attempt to frighten him. Ja'Cory, however, only claimed to be friends with the brothers and to have had no involvement in their deaths. However, Bryce persisted in telling the police that he didn't know the brothers' whereabouts and ultimately asked for legal assistance. The police changed their strategy after Ja'Cory and Bryce failed to provide any helpful information. They observed a shift in Anjoan's behavior during their individual interviews with him. Anjoan eventually talked about what had actually transpired on the evening of May 21 at that point. He clarified that evening, Bryce had summoned him and Ja'Cory to his apartment. There, Bryce told them his biggest secret, that he was afraid Larry and Maurice might tell the police about something they had seen on May 4, 2016. In order to get Ja'Cory and Anjoan to help him with a plan, Bryce was able to convince them to do something horrible, kill the brothers on the evening of May 21. Telling the brothers that Bryce was taking them to a party, Ja'Cory went to their house and persuaded them to come out. After a period of hesitation, Larry and Maurice consented to go along. They promised their mother, Elizabeth, that they would return later that evening as they left the house. Since his mother was out of town that weekend, the group had driven to Bryce's house, which he shared with her. Like any other party, the boys settled in and started hanging out and having a good time, but Larry and Maurice were unaware that something sinister was simmering in the background. Unexpectedly, a dispute erupted among the group, ruining the enjoyable party atmosphere. Ja'Cory accused the brothers of stealing money from Bryce, according to Anjuan, who told the police. Maurice became enraged when Ja'Cory confronted him about the theft. The whole situation escalated when Maurice felt threatened and sensed danger, reaching for a knife to protect himself and his brother. Ja'Cory lunged in and took the knife away from Maurice when he saw him carrying it, according to Anjuan. After that, they both succeeded in subduing the brothers and belting them. To prevent either brother from defending themselves, they separated Larry and Maurice, leaving Larry in the bathroom while Bryce brought Maurice to his knees in the living room. Bryce insisted that Maurice ask for forgiveness, even though he pleaded for their lives. As Ja'Cory and Anjuan watched Maurice tearfully plead for forgiveness in an attempt to protect himself and his brother from whatever was going to happen next, it was a tense moment. Bryce was unrestrained in his cruelty. He placed a blanket on the floor beneath Maurice, pulled stockings over his head, and stuffed a rag in his mouth. Then, in a startling display of violence, Bryce repeatedly stabbed Maurice in the chest and started beating him viciously. The graphic and horrifying scene in front of them frightened and unsettled the other teenagers who were watching. With his intimidating manner, Bryce intimidated the boys who were watching the horror and coerced Anjuan into giving Maurice a single stab wound to the chest. Anjuan reluctantly followed Bryce's orders and stabbed Maurice out of fear for his wrath. Anjuan went on to tell his terrifying story, revealing that after Maurice died, Bryce dragged Larry from the bathroom into the living room, where his brother's blood was all over the floor. Larry was devastated to learn that his brother was no longer alive. Bryce shifted his focus to Larry, pushing aside Maurice's lifeless body. Anjuan could still clearly recall Larry's agonized voice as he begged Bryce to spare him, but he was unsuccessful. Like his brother, Larry endured the same horrifying treatment. Before Bryce shockingly stabbed Larry 20 times in the chest, Anjuan could still hear his frantic cries. Bryce coerced Ja'Cory into stabbing Larry by threatening him once more. Now that Maurice and Larry were dead, Bryce called a friend to help dispose of them and loaded their bodies into the car. Bryce left Anjuan and Jacory in the apartment to clean up the gory scene while he and his friend drove away with the brothers' lifeless bodies in the back seat. Bryce drove their dead bodies to an abandoned lot and burned them. Anjuan disclosed as he continued his confession. Maurice and Larry's bodies burned that fateful night as the flames consumed them. Fortunately, though, their bodies had not burned to ashes. The police eventually learned the terrible truth about Larry and Maurice's terrible demise after questioning Nguyen, but they still had unanswered questions. What was the brothers' relationship to Bryce, and what was the secret that brought the siblings such a terrible end? Despite being stepbrothers, Larry and Maurice had a close relationship and were just typical teenagers who loved life. However, things changed when they met Bryce in 2015, and they were immediately drawn to his laid-back demeanor. Bryce was a rapper who appeared extremely wealthy and successful in a number of music videos that were posted online. His charisma and way of life captivated Larry and Maurice, who quickly became enmeshed in his world. As they grew closer, Bryce introduced them to Jacory Taylor, a 17-year-old friend. A fourth teen, 14-year-old Anjuan Carter, joined the group as the three boys spent more and more time with Bryce. They all spent a lot of time with Bryce in 2015. He would take them places, buy them food and clothing, and even give them money to spend however they wanted. According to Jacory's police interview, Bryce used to assure them that if they followed in his footsteps, they would become famous. The boys appeared to adopt Bryce's gangster lifestyle more and more over time. They even made an appearance in a few of his music videos, which suggested that they were taking up his mindset. During this time, Elizabeth observed a shift in their conduct. Images of them smoking cigars, flaunting stacks of cash, posing with fictitious weapons, and featuring women began to flood their social media accounts. They also started going to parties frequently, sometimes staying out for days at a time. Late on May 4, 2016, they were making their way back from one of these parties. Maurice was driving Bryce's car at around 12:30 a.m., with Anjuan in a truck following them, Jacory in the passenger seat, and Bryce and Larry in the back. When Maurice noticed a man strolling on the sidewalk in the 800 block of South 43rd Street in Louisville, Kentucky, Bryce abruptly forced Maurice to apply the brakes. He struggled to recall where he had known him, but it quickly became clear that he was Christopher Jones, the 40-year-old man targeted by neighborhood gangs. However, Bryce made a grave error. He mistook Christopher for someone else, attempting to pick up the prize that had been placed on his head. It was such a mistake that it abruptly altered everything. Bryce jerked out his gun in a panic and fired a bullet from the car window into Christopher's chest. All of the teenagers were in disbelief as they saw a murder unfold before their very eyes as Christopher fell. Fearful and pumped with adrenaline, they drove as quickly as they could out of there without even pausing to think. Christopher was taken to emergency surgery after the shooting, but he tragically passed away during the procedure. Larry and Maurice couldn't get over the horror of what they'd witnessed for the next 2 weeks, even after Bryce had driven the boys home and told them not to speak about what had happened that night. They became uncomfortable around Bryce and began to avoid him more and more. Bryce, meanwhile, was experiencing anxiety as well. He was concerned that he would be in big trouble if the brothers told everyone about the shooting. Thus, on the evening of May 21, 2016, he decided to take their lives. Bryce made the terrible choice to kill 3 people in a short amount of time, all in self-defense. The repercussions of his actions, however, are now bearing down on him. Both Jacory and Anjuan confessed to 3 charges of aiding and abetting murder and tampering with evidence after the interrogations. They were sentenced to 10 years in juvenile detention facilities because they were under the age of 18, with the remaining time to be spent in adult prisons after they reached the age of 18. They also had to testify against Bryce at his trial as part of their agreements. Bryce has ruined the court proceedings ever since he was taken into custody. The relatives of the victims believed he did it intentionally. He knew the prosecution wanted the death penalty, so they thought he was trying to stir up trouble. He reasoned that they might not execute him if he caused enough trouble and slowed down the procedure. Bryce did something startling at first. When he discovered that his court-appointed lawyer was friends with the victim's grandfather, he spat on him. Due to a conflict of interest, this created a significant issue and forced the lawyer to withdraw from the case. The court footage even shows the fight that broke out later between Bryce and the lawyer. Bryce even threatened to "see you when I get out." As a result, Bryce was forced to wear a spit mask and be restrained to his chair during subsequent court appearances. However, his behavior did not change despite these actions. He even threatened the judge and her family during one hearing. Bryce's courtroom antics continued after that. He frequently asserted that he didn't trust his lawyer and wouldn't allow them to speak for him. As a result, he even had 3 different state-appointed lawyers. It seemed as though he was adamant about doing things his own way, regardless of what other people thought. Following this court appearance in 2017, Bryce dug a hole in his cell in an attempt to break out of jail. Officers discovered the hole, though, along with a threatening note he had sent to Ja'Cory. "Rats get exposed," the note said. "This demonstrated Bryce's will to control even while incarcerated. Prove to me that you're not a rat." Another shocking incident that was caught on court video showed Bryce acting shamelessly as he was seen blowing kisses at the victim's mother. It was an unsettling demonstration of his lack of regret or shame for what he had done. The trial was repeatedly delayed, and Elizabeth was growing more and more irritated with Bryce's demeanor in the courtroom, as well as the delays. She had to leave the courtroom during one hearing because her emotions got the better of her. She later told reporters that she was still grieving over the loss of her 2 boys to this monster, even though she was attempting to find forgiveness through her faith. Her description of Bryce as ill and a demon made clear how deeply she felt pained and angry with him. Justice was finally done. In 2022, after Bryce's absurd actions and dramatic courtroom proceedings lasted for 6 long years, Bryce Rhodes was found guilty of killing 2 teenage brothers, Maurice Gordon, 16, and Larry Ordway, 14, by stabbing them and setting their bodies on fire. They allegedly saw him shoot and kill 40-year-old Christopher Jones in 2016, which prompted this horrific act. The jury also found Bryce guilty of 2 counts of abuse of a corpse and tampering with physical evidence, in addition to the 3 murder charges. The jury suggested a life sentence without the possibility of parole for the killings. They also proposed a 5-year sentence for evidence tampering and a 1-year sentence for each count of corpse abuse. Although Bryce was not eligible for the death penalty, his sentences will be served concurrently, meaning that unless his defense prevails in an appeal, he will be imprisoned for the remainder of his life. Deborah Wren, the grandmother of the teenage brothers, spoke tearfully about her memories following the verdict. The jury had to consider Bryce Rhodes' mental state during the trial in order to determine the appropriate punishment for him. According to psychologists consulted by the defense, Rhodes had an intellectual disability. They added that he had bipolar disorder and ADHD, but they felt he hadn't gotten the help or instruction he required to cope with these issues. The jury chose to side with the prosecution and the victims in spite of these arguments. How do you feel about the case? How did the teenage boys in the case become more vulnerable as a result of the absence of positive adult role models? What steps can be taken to stop future instances of violence and manipulation among young people who are already at risk? And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments, what part of this story shocked you the most? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Arthur Hughes, then 7 years old, would give up on life at this very moment. 5 hours later, the world would hear the most tragic story on the internet, that of Arthur Hughes, after an emergency 999 call was placed. He was discovered in a state that could not be explained by a fall, even though he had fallen and struck his head. He was remembered for his superpower, his smile. If one could ask for one last thing, despite having numerous guardian angels around him, Arthur was imprisoned by pure evil during COVID-19 and spent every day of his life in hell. Soon, the Midlands, England Police Department would find horrifying hidden footage and videos that they would prefer not to view. June 17, 2020 was the date of the call. The voice on the line was panicked. 6-year-old Arthur Hughes had fallen down the stairs. When paramedics arrived, he was having trouble breathing. Arthur's life slipped away in spite of all the attempts to save him. Before the doctors noticed something that would haunt them for years, it appeared to be a tragic accident. Horrible injuries were found, which contradicted the caller's account. Arthur's severe brain injuries had caused his death. According to the doctors, the damage was comparable to an automobile accident. Even the on-scene paramedics observed numerous bruises on his body, in addition to severe head trauma. Amidst the frantic words and background noise of the 999 call, the truth was concealed in plain sight. Everyone would be shocked to learn the true story of Arthur's tragic demise when the recording was played again, this time with more discerning ears and a greater sense of suspicion. Something much darker now echoed what had once seemed like desperation. Emma Tustin, 32, the stepmother and caregiver of 6-year-old Arthur Hughes, was the female voice on the call. Emma was the only person who saw Arthur's final moments because his father, 29-year-old Thomas Hughes, was not there when the alleged accident happened. She was also the one who explained how Arthur got hurt and escorted him to the hospital. However, there was a problem with the doctors. They called the police because of their suspicions, and detectives soon began requesting Emma's first formal statement. The thinking step was the punishment area that Arthur's stepmother Emma and father Thomas had created for him. He could stand there and think about what he had done. Because of his actions, Arthur often found himself there, Emma said. However, Arthur was particularly impolite and violent on the night of June 17, 2020, the day he passed away. Emma started crying as she described the mischievous child who had mistreated her. She asserted, like many other stepmothers, that her love was not returned. However, the narrative did not match Emma's story, which remained mostly unchanged from the details in the 999 call. Although more research was necessary, the results would reveal a disturbing truth that would haunt the investigators for the rest of their careers. By 1 a.m., Arthur was placed on life support. After determining that there was nothing more that could be done, life support was turned off the next day. A forensic analysis conducted as the investigation progressed showed that Arthur had more than 130 distinct wounds, from head to toe, in varying stages of recovery. Each and every part of his small body was injured and bruised. Long-term physical stress caused his thymus gland and one kidney to shrink significantly. However, a total detachment of the retina in his right eye and bleeding on the brain were the cause of death. The experts had no idea that this was only the beginning. He had extremely high sodium levels when he was first brought to the hospital. These levels did not change 7 hours later, suggesting that his body was unable to adequately absorb the excess salt he had consumed. According to estimates, Arthur would have needed to eat 6 tablespoons of salt in a single day, or more likely, be poisoned with high amounts of salt over a number of days to reach such sodium levels. Torture was evident from the autopsy report and the injuries sustained. However, that wasn't even the reason this case was the most well-known in Middleton. It was the horrifying findings that had not yet been made during the inquiry that had the public's attention like a wildfire. Authorities were tracking down the sadistic monster who had committed the unthinkable after discovering the unspeakable horror inflicted upon the defenseless child. Behind the story of the tearful Emma and the restless Thomas, there was little question that something was amiss. Across the nation, rumors were circulating, but it quickly became clear that these were more than just conjectures. Discovering the atrocities that had taken place behind the scenes was the difficult part. A search warrant for Emma's 2-bedroom home, where she lived with her boyfriend Thomas Hughes and their children from prior marriages, was swiftly obtained by the Middleton police. Apart from a CCTV camera placed in the living room, nothing seemed especially noteworthy at first glance. Investigators were informed by Emma and Thomas that it was done to keep an eye on Arthur and make sure he didn't hurt himself. The investigators were unaware that the recordings held terrible secrets they would have preferred to ignore when they took them for additional analysis. Heartbreaking details of little Arthur's last hours were captured on CCTV, including scenes that would have horrified anyone who saw them. This unsettling video was captured just a few hours prior to Arthur's purported mishap. Arthur pleaded with Blake to come and save his life. Who were these individuals that Arthur was depending on in the final stages of his life? Blake was Thomas Hughes's brother and Arthur's uncle. When Arthur called for his family outside of Emma and Thomas, he was seen to be weak, frail, and hardly standing. Detectives contacted Arthur's grandparents and Uncle Blake during the hours that these recordings were being examined. In addition to being open, the family had a lot to share. The date of Arthur's birth was January 4, 2014. He was among the happiest kids you could ever meet just a year ago. He was a huge supporter of Birmingham City Football Club and loved superheroes. Those who knew him said he was intelligent and vivacious, but as the grandparents dug deeper, it became evident that Arthur was a contented but unlucky child. Thomas and Olivia Labagno-Halcrow, who met while engaging in drug activities, are his parents. Olivia entered a new toxic relationship with Arthur after the parents divorced, but Arthur stayed with her. She had taken an alcohol awareness course and met a man named Gary Cunningham. Gary and Olivia both used violence against one another. In February 2019, this toxic relationship tragically came to a head when Olivia killed Gary by stabbing him 12 times while intoxicated. The fact that young Arthur saw the murder was the most startling aspect of this incident. Olivia received an 11-year sentence in 2020. Little Arthur moved in with his father, Thomas, and grandparents while the mother was serving her sentence. His grandparents and his uncle Blake were the main sources of the love he had experienced. For Arthur, this was the safest period of his life. The trail of misfortune started with a simple date, but the wave of good times would soon subside. Thomas, his father, went on a date with Emma Tustin, a woman he had met online. Detectives discovered that Emma had a history of unpredictable and attention-seeking behavior as the investigation progressed. When her boyfriend threatened to break up with her in 2013, she leaped from the top of a multi-story parking structure. She once threw herself out of a bedroom window to stop her partner and his best friend from going to the pub. In an interview with the Daily Mail, one of her ex-boyfriends stated, "She's a black widow. Every man she hangs out with is sucked dry by her. She has absolutely no maternal instinct. She wanted children because of the attention they gave her as a newborn and the benefits they provided. But she didn't want to know once the attention stopped and she was left alone with a baby." She was also accused of being a careless mother, and social services frequently visited her home. The ultimate application of this woman's evil would be when she entered Thomas's, and eventually Arthur's, life. Thomas wasn't a perfect father, but he wasn't a total nightmare either. But as he and Emma became closer, that would soon change, and Arthur would lose his father in a way he never could have predicted. Arthur went on a number of excursions with his father and Emma, but each time he came back, the grandparents noticed that he was becoming less and less eager to accompany them. He couldn't quite understand the unnerving tension that was replacing the warmth of family. His grandparents claimed that they became aware that something was amiss in their own house. Every time Emma came to visit, Arthur would try to hide because he was afraid of her. She was disliked by Thomas's brother and parents as well, who perceived dishonesty and disdain in her. They were unable to foresee the scope of what was happening, though. When Arthur's grandmother tried to buy him a Subway sandwich during one of Emma's visits, Emma yelled at her to stop feeding him, saying it was a needless luxury. This brief interaction acted as a warning, demonstrating Emma's ease and eagerness to make choices regarding Arthur's life. She wasn't alone, though. Thomas was also acting differently. He had started to become easily agitated. Blake saw the young boy staring blankly at the wall when Thomas, for a child, it was an unusual sight. Blake tried to give him a snack to lift his spirits, but Thomas stepped in and said Arthur was being punished and shouldn't be fed. As the pandemic spread, this was only the start of a nightmare that would only get worse. A total lockdown was proclaimed by the Prime Minister. Arthur had the danger in his own house while others hunkered down to protect themselves. Separated from his cherished grandparents, he was raised by his father, Thomas, and Emma, and saw them infrequently. Things were gradually coming together for Arthur's decline. Arthur's grandmother saw a blue bruise on his shoulder during one lockdown. She took prompt action and lodged a complaint with social services, even though she was Thomas's mother. When Arthur got back to Emma and Thomas's house the next day, a social services agent called Emma and paid her a visit. But nothing was done about it. They insisted that Arthur and Emma's other two children looked content and healthy, and they denied that there was any bruise. But the call prior to the visit was sufficient justification for Emma to be on guard and take the required precautions to hide it, according to the grandmother. Blake tried to get in touch with the Middleton police, but sadly the officers never got through to Arthur because they believed social services was handling the case. The family made repeated attempts to enlist assistance for Arthur, but there would be no outcome. Arthur was suffering terribly, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. Meanwhile, Arthur's death was being investigated more thoroughly. Though they were unsure of what might have caused Arthur's death, Arthur's grandparents and family blamed Emma and Thomas. The couple was the subject of a more thorough investigation, and the most repulsive information began to come to light. After seizing their phones, investigators started going through the data. They found shocking information in the audio recordings and text messages between Emma and Thomas. The weight of what had been concealed behind closed doors became painfully evident with every new line that appeared on the screen. Emma and Thomas's messages exposed the depth of their perverse collaboration, and they were complicit in this nightmare. The messages described Arthur's living conditions, which included physical abuse, loneliness, and hunger. Emma vented her frustrations and documented her increasing cruelty towards the boy in the majority of these texts. She punished Arthur by depriving him of food and liquids and making him stand in the hallway for hours on end. The young boy's pleas for sustenance and solace were ridiculed. He referred to his desperation as misbehavior. For Emma and Thomas, the conversations were a perverse kind of reinforcement in these messages. When Thomas wasn't home, she would frequently record Arthur's anguished cries and send Thomas audio snippets, seemingly to get his approval for her severe treatment. Thomas would reply by expressing his own annoyance with Arthur and urging her to be even harsher, telling her to just end him or recommending violent means to stop his screams. The boy was left to suffer alone in his room or cry himself hoarse in the hallway while the couple, at times, were only a few feet away from Arthur and texted, their phones buzzing with nasty conversations. Emma complained that Arthur was acting out or spoiling him because of his need for affection. Emma and Thomas talked about how Arthur should be disciplined for small transgressions or denied certain foods. Neglect was not the only form of abuse. There were numerous instances of name-calling and verbal abuse in these messages. Both sides' hatred was clearly visible in these messages. The messages made it abundantly evident that there was physical torture and intimidation in the home. Arthur had been attacked several times. According to one of the messages, Emma and Thomas had a falling out, and Emma said she could accept Thomas but not Arthur. In a stern reply, Thomas insisted that she would have to take Arthur and him together or not at all. Since Emma's rejection of Arthur only made Thomas more irate, this exchange exposed the problematic dynamics of their relationship. This tension suggested that Thomas's rage could quickly grow and result in more abuse of Arthur. One thing was certain, despite the numerous questions, Arthur was leading a miserable life and frequently going without food. For the investigators, one CCTV clip that had previously seemed unimportant took on new significance. On one of the hottest days of the year, the video showed Thomas and Emma lounging and eating ice cream. Arthur, meanwhile, was made to stand on the stairs, hot and hungry, without water, and in a bulky onesie that made him feel even more uncomfortable. Emma stooped to eat McDonald's in front of a starving Arthur, who was left defenseless in the hallway, while Thomas sat cross-legged. The question came up. Did Emma's children all experience the same level of suffering? The investigators learned from Arthur's grandparents that Emma's children were frequently abandoned and left hungry for extended periods of time, while Emma remained in her room. But Arthur's ordeal was particularly horrifying. Emma's children didn't seem to experience the same degree of abuse as Arthur in any of the video. Subsequently, Emma's kids would inform investigators that if they attempted to assist Arthur, they would also be punished. As another heartbreaking clip awaited their review, the unsettling details of this case seemed to go on forever. Arthur was seen standing and shuffle-footing in these clips. It appeared innocuous at first, until they discovered he had been upright for as long as 14 hours. Police clamped down on Thomas and Emma as the horrific details surfaced, interrogating them about Arthur and the devastating information in the recordings. The details of Thomas and Emma's accident story started to shift piece by piece, but Thomas would be the first to reveal the truth, which was even more terrifying than they already knew. Thomas admitted to them that his punishment of Arthur might have been excessive. He explained to the investigators that Emma and the family suffered as a result of Arthur's behavioral problems. Thomas was going to disclose that he had studied torture techniques used during interrogation, techniques that caused the most pain without leaving scars or bruises, even though it was difficult to comprehend what offense a 6-year-old could have committed to warrant such a punishment. What actually took place on June 17, 2020 then? But did Arthur's body simply give up after all this suffering? No. The case's reality was straightforward and cruel. In fact, the reality was even more horrible. Arthur was left behind as usual, weak and starved, while Thomas had gone to the grocery store with Emma's kids. Emma texted Thomas that Arthur was causing trouble and instructed her to discipline him, even though Arthur couldn't have done anything that she couldn't manage on her own. In a matter of hours, Emma made the decision to act independently and guided Arthur to his demise. Emma repeatedly slammed Arthur's head against the wall, knocking him out by the time Thomas got back. After several unsuccessful attempts to get Arthur to get up, Emma called 999 and told them that Arthur had beaten himself before falling. Thomas blatantly admitted to the investigators that he was to blame and that Emma ought to be released. He explained to them that Arthur died because he was unable to control him and was subsequently carried away. Emma wasn't at fault. From Middleton to Parliament, the unsettling case rocked the nation. The authorities eventually realized that Emma and Thomas had lied after Arthur died, and the injuries were obviously not self-inflicted. Both were taken into custody and accused of killing Arthur. At Emma's trial on December 3, 2021, the judge gave the following account of the deadly assault. You, Tustin, committed the last act of killing. You gave him a shake that caused his head to flex and become hyperextended on his neck while repeatedly striking it against the wall or the floor. Your degree of violence caused his body to be subjected to forces comparable to those involved in a high-speed traffic accident. Emma was found guilty of murder and given a life sentence with a minimum of 29 years in prison because of the severe and devastation of her injuries. Thomas Hughes, who did not witness the deadly assault, was convicted of manslaughter and given a 21-year prison term. It was announced in December 2020 that their sentences would be examined to determine whether they were excessively light, potentially resulting in longer terms for both. Only the two youngest of Emma's 4 children from prior relationships were still living with her when she first met Thomas. Emma had already been reported to social services multiple times by that point because of worries about the welfare of her children. But she had mastered the art of controlling these circumstances. She would use emotional strategies, crying and playing the victim whenever social services came to visit. The authorities would always depart without doing anything more. Although social services had always been mentioned in the story, their non-participation was an unexpected plot twist. How come Arthur's ongoing suffering went unnoticed despite social services getting involved in this case so early? How did social services contribute to Arthur's demise in your opinion? What, in your opinion, ought to have been done to save young Arthur from his cruel destiny? And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments, what part of this story shocked you the most? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. 2 roommates, Lori Lister, age 21, and Melinda Aguilar, age 18, were the victims of a horrific attack in their Houston, Texas apartment on Sunday, May 23, 1982. They appeared to be the target of a man who was obviously trying to kill them. He restrained them and tried to drown Lori in the bathtub of their apartment. Melinda managed to get away, though, by feigning fainting and then plunging headfirst from her balcony. She asked for assistance, and she and her roommate were saved with the help of a neighbor. As he tried to escape, the offender, Coral Watts, 28, was taken into custody. Nobody could have predicted that he was suspected of killing nearly 100 other women, in addition to being involved in these 2 attempted murders. In 1982, he admitted to the murders of 13 women, and was sentenced to 60 years in prison. Then, in a startling turn of events in the early 2000s, this man, who had committed multiple murders, was about to be released from prison. He was reclassified as a nonviolent felon as a result of a contentious court decision. Remarkably, well-behaved nonviolent felons could have 3 days taken off their sentence for every day they served under Texas law. Model inmate Watts had accrued enough time deductions to be eligible for release on May 9, 2006. The public, police, and relatives of the victims were all in complete shock and terror. Everyone was plagued by the unanswered question, why? How could a murderer like him be freed against all logic? What possible reason could there be for releasing a serial killer who has killed numerous people? Richard Eugene Watts and Dorothy Mae Young were the parents of Carl Eugene Watts, also known as Coral, who was born in Killeen, Texas, on November 7, 1953. His mother was a kindergarten art teacher, and his father was a private first class in the Army. Watts was raised by his mother after his parents divorced before he turned 2. After they moved to Inkster, Michigan, Dorothy Mae married Norman Caesar, a mechanic, in 1962. The two of them had 2 daughters. Watts and his sister fought meningitis when Watts was 8 years old. He was held back in school for an additional year and missed the 3rd grade because of the illness, which almost took his life. Watts was temporarily housed at Herman Kiefer Hospital, where he required isolation from other patients and spinal taps. Journalists reported that Watts' body temperature rose to dangerously high levels, which raised questions about possible brain damage. His family observed a change in his personality after his illness. His memory deteriorated, his attention span was shortened, and he became shy, quiet, and introverted. Having been held back a grade and experiencing chronic insomnia, Watts struggled to keep up academically. His sleep cycle was disturbed by violent dreams in which he battled and killed the evil spirits of women. At the age of 12, Watts started to enjoy his sleep-induced fantasies of torturing and killing girls and young women. When asked later about his crimes and the reason he killed his victims, Watts explained that he wanted to free their spirits because they had evil eyes. Watts began stalking girls at this time, still a teenager, and it's believed he may have killed his first victim before turning 15. Police identified Watts as the attacker in the July 29, 1969 attack on 26-year-old Joan Gave when she was 15 years old. Watts knocked on Joan's apartment door while delivering his newspaper, and when she opened it, he attacked her severely. He carried on with his delivery route as if nothing had happened, with no remorse. Coral was arrested at his residence as a result of Joan's quick reporting of the incident to the authorities. He was then ordered to receive mental health care at a mental hospital in Detroit called the Lafayette Clinic. A psychiatric evaluation indicated a delusional thought process and a full-scale IQ of 75, indicating mild intellectual disability. He did poorly in school, but a police officer later said he was very, very intelligent and had a great memory. On November 7, 1969, Watts was discharged from the Lafayette Clinic. Watts received a football scholarship to Lane College in Jackson, Tennessee, after graduating from high school in 1973, despite having academic difficulties. After 3 months, though, he was expelled on charges of stalking and assaulting women. Watts' expulsion was also influenced by suspicions surrounding his ruthless killing of a female student. Even though there was not enough evidence to convict him, he moved to Houston, Texas after being expelled. Coral and his girlfriend Dolores Howard welcomed their daughter, Nikisha Watts, in 1979. Coral and Dolores, however, went their separate ways and broke up soon after her birth. Following that, Coral married Valeria Goodwill. Not long after they were married, Valeria saw that Coral was acting strangely. He broke candles, melted them on a table, rearranged furniture all the time, chopped up houseplants with knives, and strewn trash all over the floors without cleaning up after himself. Furthermore, he would abruptly depart after intimate moments, going missing for a few hours. Sadly, they were only married for 6 months. Although there are hints that Watts may have had more victims before this, his murders officially started in 1974, when he was 20 years old. After abducting his victims from their homes, he tortured them until he killed them. His victims were mostly slender, attractive white women between the ages of 14 and 44, and he struck in different states. Watts killed his victims by a variety of means, such as drowning, bludgeoning, stabbing, and strangulation. 10:45 a.m., Coral knocked on the door of Lenore Knizacki's apartment on October 25, 1974, saying she was trying to find Charles, one of his siblings. He carried on a conversation with Lenore. Coral asked if he could leave a note when she opened the door, the chain still fastened. He unexpectedly attacked Knizacki and strangled her until she passed out as she went to get paper. Lenore later called the police, but they couldn't find her attacker. Gloria Steele, 20, was thought to be Watts' second victim and was brutally murdered and tortured 5 days later on October 30, 1974. Gloria was a mother and a Western Michigan University student. She was discovered with 33 stab wounds to her chest from a wooden carving tool, as well as a crushed windpipe. Because there was insufficient evidence, Watts was not charged with direct murder. Diane K. Williams, an apartment resident manager and the sole witness, saw a black man looking for Charles throughout the apartment building. Coral grabbed her when she saw Williams, pried open her door and pulled her inside. Williams' phone rang during their struggle, so she knocked it off the hook and yelled for assistance. Williams saw her assailant getting into a tan Pontiac Grand Prix as he ran away. Both Williams and Knizicki recognized Coral in a police lineup. Coral had been arrested for stealing plywood from the campus of Western Michigan University. On November 16, 1974, he was arrested and charged with assault and battery in connection with the Knizicki and Williams cases. Watts was moved to the Center for Forensic Psychiatry in Michigan after being diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder and attempting suicide with a length of cord at the Kalamazoo Mental Hospital. When asked about Gloria Steele's death in 1975, he confessed to attacking about 15 other young women and acknowledged being close to her the day before she passed away, but he denied being the cause of her death. Under a search warrant, Detroit police searched Watts' home and found a wooden carving tool, but no evidence connecting him to Gloria's death. Watts was given a year in the county jail after entering a no-contest plea during his trial for the assault and battery of Knizicki and Williams. When Watts was evaluated by psychologists, they described him as incredibly dangerous, lacking regret for his crimes, reckless, careless, emotionally distant, and prone to relapsing. Following that, he killed 5 women in a series of attacks that took place in the Detroit area over the course of a year. One odd finding was that most of his crimes took place on Sunday mornings. An Ann Arbor newspaper gave the offender the sinister moniker, Sunday Morning Slasher, because of this peculiar pattern, which added to the mystery surrounding the timing of these horrific attacks, which all took place at approximately 4 a.m. On April 20, 1980, Shirley Small, then 17 years old, was fatally stabbed twice outside her Ann Arbor, Michigan home. On July 13, 1980, 26-year-old Glenda Richmond was the target of a similar attack. Although there was not enough evidence in either case to convict, Watts' traits were evident. On September 14, 1980, 20-year-old graduate student Rebecca Huff was discovered dead after suffering about 50 stab wounds, the first murder that can be directly linked to Coral. On October 6, 1980, a 20-year-old named Delpy survived an attack, but he suffered serious injuries, such as muscle weakness and partial paralysis. Agnes, a 30-year-old woman, raised the alarm on her way back from a Halloween party on November 1, 1980, and barely avoided being attacked by a hooded man who looked like Watts. She recognized Watts from pictures, but there was still some doubt because of the dark surroundings. When Watts became the focus of local homicide investigators in July 1980, a task force was established to investigate the Sunday slashings. Watts was intermittently monitored, and in November, a court order permitted officers to equip his vehicle with a tracking device. Around 5 in the morning on November 15, 1982, Ann Arbor patrol officers were near Main Street when they noticed a suspicious man in a car following a woman as she walked home. When the woman realized she was being followed, she tried to escape by hiding in a doorway. When the police stopped Coral's car for having out-of-date license plates and driving with a suspended license, they arrested him because he was upset about losing sight of the woman. When police inspected his car, they discovered a package with several screwdrivers and wood-filling tools. The most important item they found was a dictionary that belonged to Rebecca Huff and had the carved words, "Rebecca is a lover." Despite this, there was not enough evidence to connect him to her murder. Coral moved to Columbus, Texas in the spring of 1981 and found work with an oil company. On weekends, he would make the more than 70-mile journey to his next hunting location in the Houston area. Watts murdered scores of women, including dozens, between 1974 and 1982. Watts avoided being identified as a serial killer for almost 8 years in spite of the long list of victims. This elusiveness was caused by multiple factors. The fact that Watts operated in multiple jurisdictions and even states made it more difficult to link the crimes. His method of operation also deviated from the norm because, in contrast to many other serial killers who prey on women and girls, he never had physical contact with his victims. As a result, connecting the crimes was difficult, even after DNA testing was developed. Law enforcement did not recognize Watts as a possible criminal until his arrest in 1982, and those who knew him did not view him as a suspect. Watts broke into the Houston apartment of Melinda Aguilar, then 18, and Lori Lister, then 21, on May 23, 1982. Watts strangled Lori down the steps outside the apartment after she returned from work. He then went into the apartment and strangled Melinda, who feigned unconsciousness. Melinda was able to avoid being fully strangled. Watts intended to drown Lori, so he wire-tied her hands behind her back. He filled the bathtub with water and carried Lori's body upstairs to the bathroom, but Melinda took advantage of the situation and jumped out of the window to get assistance. Watts first attempted to elude capture, but was caught, and Lori was saved. Investigators began connecting him to recent murders of women while he was in detention. Texas prosecutors felt there was not enough evidence to convict Watts of murder despite the connections. After Melinda Aguilar and Lori Lister were attacked, Harris County Assistant District Attorney Ira Jones negotiated a plea deal in May 1982. Watts would be charged with burglary with intent to murder in exchange for his complete admission of guilt and immunity from prosecution for murder. For this offense, he consented to a 60-year sentence. After Watts agreed to the terms, investigators found the remains of 3 victims. At last, Watts admitted to assaulting 19 women and killing 13 of them. While he acknowledged that he killed some victims, he did not confess to the deaths of others. His cases in Michigan, however, remained open after Michigan authorities refused to take part in the agreement. When the Texas Court of Appeals decided shortly after Watts' prison sentence that he had not been told that the bathtub and water he used to try to drown Lori Lister were deadly weapons, the hope for justice took a tragic turn. Due to this ruling, he was eventually granted early release and reclassified as a nonviolent felon. This was due to Texas law at the time, which allowed nonviolent felons to have 3 days taken off their sentences for each day they behaved well. As a model prisoner, Watts accrued time deductions that resulted in his potential release on May 9, 2006. There was little comfort in the early release law's subsequent repeal, which was brought about by public outcry because the Texas Constitution prohibited its retroactive application. As Michigan Attorney General Mike Cox looked for evidence to convict Watts of murder and stop his possible release in 2004, a call for justice reverberated across the country. Westland, Michigan resident Joseph Foy courageously came forward to describe the horrific scene of Watts-like man killing 36-year-old Helen Dutcher on December 1, 1970. 12 stab wounds had claimed Helen's life. Foy recognized Watts by his eyes, which he described as evil and emotionless in a haunting way. Michigan had no such agreement, even though Watts was exempt from prosecution for the 13 confessed murders in Texas. Law enforcement officials begged the trial judge to admit the Texas confessions into evidence as the 2004 trial drew near, and he agreed. Watts was found guilty of killing Helen Dutcher and Gloria Steele, and he was given 2 life sentences without the possibility of release in a Michigan jail. He was given a sentence on November 17, 2004, to serve his time in an Ionia, Michigan, maximum security prison. But a few years after this sentence started, on September 21, 2007, he died in a Jackson, Michigan hospital from prostate cancer. Ultimately, his dark story came to a somber conclusion when he managed to avoid serving his entire sentence for the lives he took. A vicious serial killer named Coral Eugene Watts terrorized the nation with his numerous murders. Despite his confessions, he was nearly released due to legal loopholes that allowed for a reduced sentence. The extent of his darkness was revealed by his subsequent conviction for Helen Dutcher's murder in 1979. In April 2379, Watts' legacy is haunted by the fact that he left the Ann Arbor murders unsolved, a terrifying reminder of hidden evil. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. A terrible crime is depicted in the tragic events of November 28, 2014 in Fort Worth, Texas. An apartment complex resident named Ashley Ann Harris, 31, was the target of a vicious and premeditated attack. The events that transpired on that fateful day raised troubling doubts regarding the motivation behind this barbaric deed. The incident started when a worried apartment complex resident called 911 on December 12th. Having called day 1 on a telephone, she called day 209. Emergency personnel hurried to the scene after they reported a fire in one of the units. The fact that this incident would turn into a murder investigation was unknown to them. The apartment was occupied by Ashley Ann Harris when it caught fire. Nobody was able to verify at first whether Ashley was in the burning apartment. Firefighters fought the fire with courage and were able to contain it. The terrible truth was revealed only after the fire was extinguished. Since Ashley had been in her apartment the entire time, police concluded that the fire was not an accident because of Ashley's body. Ashley had been severely beaten, as evidenced by the pool of blood surrounding her lifeless body. Her ankles suffered the same fate as her hands, which were brutally bound with duct tape, leaving her helpless. There were more indications of violence. Her body was scarred by burns, and she had endured the pain of strangulation. Moreover, her throat had been brutally cut, adding to the horror. As the investigation progressed, it became evident that this was a carefully thought out and horrifyingly carried out murder, rather than merely a tragic accident or an isolated act of violence. After committing this horrible crime, the evidence suggested that someone had purposefully set the apartment on fire. The offender had also sprayed rubbing alcohol on Ashley's bed and other parts of her apartment, seemingly in an effort to cover up any evidence of their actions. But the horrific reality had not been hidden by the fire. The case's apparent lack of motivation was one confusing feature. Since Ashley's keys were the only item missing from her apartment, investigators were left wondering, what could motivate someone to attack an innocent woman in such a vicious and heartless manner? As law enforcement looked for answers, justice, and closure for Ashley Ann Harris's bereaved family, the murder investigation would surely be a difficult and heartbreaking one. The police started looking for answers. Interviews with Ashley's neighbors marked the start of their adventure. One of them, Stephen Lee, lived in an apartment next door. He described an odd sighting at around 6:30 a.m. that fateful morning. He was smoking a cigarette on his balcony when he spotted an unknown car parked close by. The car in question was a sleek black Infiniti G35, which was unusual in their peaceful neighborhood. This observation would turn out to be a key clue in the mystery that was developing. But Stephen Lee's story wasn't the only piece of the puzzle. At around 7:30 a.m., Ashley's neighbor Patrick Sweet, who lived directly below her apartment, told the police a terrifying revelation. A spine-tingling scream reverberated from above, startling and upsetting Patrick as he was startled out of his morning routine. After that, he heard a number of disturbing sounds, such as what sounded like a heavy thud and frantic, gasping breaths. He was terrified, but his carbon monoxide detector's blaring alarm was what finally got him to act. He became aware that a fire was occurring, so he quickly called 911 to solve the mystery of Ashley's disappearance. Ashley was employed as an assistant manager at an American Eagle store in the Hulen Mall, and the police painstakingly tracked her movements on the day in question. Their investigation revealed that she had eaten dinner in one of the apartments in their complex on Thanksgiving Day with her close friend Alexis Torres and a group of acquaintances. After dinner, Ashley went to work. The Black Friday sales craze during Ashley's work shift made for a long and exhausting evening. Alexis kindly volunteered to watch Ashley's cherished dog, Nala. Ashley is back at home. Was marked by the early morning. At approximately 3:15 a.m., Alexis visited briefly before leaving after 4 a.m. The timeline started to become crucial to the investigation at this point. According to the police, Ashley died suddenly between 4:15 and 7:30 in the morning. Because of this crucial period, the authorities were keen to find and talk to the owner of the enigmatic black Infiniti G35 in order to provide insight into what happened during those hours. After discovering the black Infiniti G35, the police made the decision to interrogate Alexis, Ashley's friend. She said she didn't know who owned the car. They are intrigued, though, by a tip from Christopher "Chris Cravey" Ashley's boss. He told the police that he knew a woman named Carol Cervantes, who was a driver of one of these vehicles. The plot twist was that Carter had been fired in August after having previously worked at Ashley Leah's American Eagle store. The police began monitoring Carter's home after obtaining this lead. The following Saturday morning at 8 a.m., their patience paid off when they saw Carter leave her apartment and get into her Infiniti G35 with a man. After that, the man drove her to Hulin Mall, where he parked after dropping her off at the entrance. When the police came to question him, they found that he was actually Clarence, Carter's boyfriend. David Mallory, who used to work at the same American Eagle store, became suspicious when Clarence was unable to provide his driver's license when asked, which resulted in his arrest. Officers observed some odd details about him while he was at the police station. The plastic price tag fastener was still on his brand new ski mask, which showed no signs of wear. In addition, his lower lip, which was visibly swollen even after Clarence was arrested, looked like a recent injury. Despite being seen entering the mall, Carter was never seen again. Instead, she was apprehended at her apartment complex, where she appeared to be doing laundry and taken in for interrogation. Her initial claim that she had not left the apartment complex that day was refuted by surveillance footage, which showed her leaving the mall and making her way home. According to the police, she may have decided to walk the 2 miles home after spotting them conversing with Clarence in the mall parking lot. Notably, they noticed minor scratches on her arms as the puzzle pieces came together. The police had to determine whether Carter and Clarence were involved in Ashley's terrible death, and if so, what the motivation was for the gruesome events that had taken place. A troubling picture of the circumstances leading up to Ashley's untimely death was painted by additional evidence that surfaced. An important turning point in the investigation was when Ashley's missing keys were found, since it turned out that they also provided access to the American Eagle store where she worked. Given that Ashley's keys could open the store safe, the police concluded that Carter and Clarence had planned Ashley's murder. Stealing what they thought was tens of thousands of dollars, presumably amassed from Black Friday sales, seemed to be the crux of their evil scheme. Armed with Ashley's keys, they carried out their plan on a fateful Saturday morning, but when they got to the store, they ran into an unforeseen problem. Their attempt at robbery was foiled by the fact that the locks had already been changed. Additional incriminating evidence was discovered during the search of Carter and Clarence's apartment. They discovered a taser box, a plastic tub with bungee cords and a rope, a lock in a kitchen drawer, and some discarded duct tape. They also found a broken deadbolt lock, 2 more locks that looked like they were used for practice and were marked as lock-picking practice locks, and the black Infiniti G35, a key vehicle in the investigation, which also had sinister secrets inside. They found a plastic bag inside a black garbage bag, a sharpening stone that was probably used for a knife, a 9mm cartridge, a cell phone, a walkie-talkie, and a sheathed buck knife. Notably, they also discovered a kitchen knife, an unopened tarp, and a toboggan with a hole cut in it. The finding was perhaps the most concerning. 3 of a loaded Glock 19 concealed beneath the driver's seat with a bullet in the chamber. The disturbing picture of Carter and Clarence's role in Ashley's murder was painted by these strong pieces of evidence. The state decided not to pursue the death penalty after both defendants were charged with capital murder. Instead, it sought life in prison without the possibility of release for both of them. Carter and Clarence upheld their not guilty pleas in spite of the overwhelming evidence against them, paving the way for a torturous court battle that would ultimately decide their fate. Although the prosecution gave both defendants a largely consistent story, the court cases of Carter, Carol Cervantes, and Clarence, David Mallory, developed independently. But after Carter's case was heard, attention turned to proving that she was the alleged mastermind of the crime. The prosecution believed that Carter and Clarence had several reasons for wanting to hurt Ashley. First, they thought the two wanted Ashley's keys, which would allow them to enter the store safe and the large amount of money they assumed was kept there, especially after the Black Friday sales. The prosecution also claimed that Carter and Clarence wanted to exact revenge on Ashley. An additional layer of personal animosity was introduced into the situation when they blamed her for their dismissal. The court proceedings explored the individuals' personal histories. In June 2014, Ashley took over as store manager while her boss, Chris, was on medical leave. An important part of the operation had been played by Carter, the store's assistant manager. Notably, on August 24, 2014, she had also employed Clarence, her boyfriend, to work with her at the same place. A sizable amount of $18,000 inexplicably vanished from the American Eagle store's safe. When Ashley, who was in charge of locking the store that evening, noticed that the back door had been left open, suspicion was cast on Carter. Clarence was identified in surveillance footage as the person who had broken into the safe and stolen the cash. This finding signaled the start of a series of events that would ultimately result in a tragic conclusion. Chris, Ashley's boss, didn't find out that Carter had employed Clarence until after the theft. It was shocking to learn that Clarence had a history with the American Eagle brand, having worked at an Amarillo store. However, his record in the American Eagle system was marked as non-rehirable, meaning he should not be employed at any American Eagle location. Chris revealed something shocking. In order to evade detection and get around any warning signs, Carter had changed Clarence's name and social security number in the system and manipulated his personnel file. This information implied a troubling degree of Carter and Clarence's collusion. It became clear as hostilities increased that Carter and Clarence had been plotting Ashley's kidnapping and key retrieval. Images of Ashley's apartment, her apartment door, and her car were among the incriminating evidence found on their cell phones. On their cell phones, police also found latitude and longitude coordinates. The terrifying story was further enhanced by Detective Cedillo's testimony, which disclosed that one of Clarence's texts included coordinates that, when entered into Google Earth, identified a location close to Lufkin, Texas. Detective Cedillo discovered a terrifying hole at this location that was 6 feet long, 2.5 feet wide, and 3 feet deep. It looked grimly like a grave for a human. The prosecution argued that the original plan was to kidnap Ashley, threaten her with a pistol, and then kill her somewhere else. But when Ashley refused to let them into her apartment, their plans took a sinister turn, and she tragically died there. More disturbing evidence surfaced. 2 shovels, a box of plastic sheeting, and a box of Craftsman sockets were found by police when they searched Clarence's Cadillac, indicating a sinister and planned motive. These disclosures presented an unsettling image of a well-thought-out crime in which Carter and Clarence were purportedly driven by retaliation as well as financial gain. As the trial went on, the prosecution called witnesses who provided more insight into the terrible circumstances surrounding Ashley's passing. Jeff Kaiser, Ashley's close friend and neighbor, was one such witness. Jeff described the terrifying morning when he was startled awake by the sound of fire alarms, recognizing that Ashley's apartment was in danger, and he acted quickly after noticing her car was still parked outside. He hurried upstairs without thinking and kicked down Ashley's apartment door with courage. When Jeff walked in, he saw a chaotic scene. The apartment was filled with smoke, and the sprinkler system sprayed water, making the place dangerous and confusing. Even though it was dangerous, Jeff tried to crawl toward the kitchen to get to Ash, but the dense smoke soon overpowered him and he had to back off to get some fresh air. Unfazed, he made 2 more heroic attempts, but the smoke was too thick to handle. Luckily, rescue efforts were taken over by firefighters who had already arrived on the scene. Arson investigator Wallace E. Hood Jr. offered crucial information about the fire's cause. He stated in his testimony that he was able to pinpoint several places where the fire started, including Ashley's bed and the closet. One particularly unsettling discovery was the smoke detector's purposeful removal and hiding under the mattress. These discoveries suggested a malevolent and deliberate act meant to hide the fire and make Ashley's chances of surviving even more difficult. With a string of gripping incidents and testimony, the courtroom drama went on. The prosecution showed surveillance footage taken in front of the American Eagle store on November 29 at around 2 in the morning, which showed an enigmatic individual trying to operate the gate lock. The prosecution claimed it was Carter, but the person's face was hidden. The altered locks made it impossible for them to unlock and raise the gate, despite their obvious attempts. This implied that Carter might have had plans involving the crime or the store. Unaware that the police were observing them, Carter and Clarence returned to the mall at 8 a.m. that same day, the court was informed. Given the previous unsuccessful attempt to enter the store, this raised concerns about their intentions and behavior. In the parking lot of the mall, Clarence was taken into custody. He told the police that Carter had gone inside to get some documents. Carter was not present in the mall when the police searched it, though. Suspicions regarding her movements and activities were raised when she was eventually found at her apartment complex. Important details regarding Ashley's injuries were supplied by Dr. Richard Fries, a deputy medical examiner at the Tarrant County Medical Examiner's Office. The extent of her physical trauma was graphically depicted by the autopsy. Among Ashley's many wounds were cuts to her cheek, scalp, and left side of her face. Her chin was scraped, her lip had laceration and scrape marks, and her right side was marred by a patterned bruise, with additional bruises discovered around her left eye and between her eyes. The most unsettling finding was probably a star-shaped cut behind her left ear with a bruise surrounding it, which the medical examiner determined was the result of a pistol blow. The testimony described Ashley's experience in a distressing way, implying that she had been beaten viciously and savagely. Ashley sustained multiple wounds, including a knife wound to her neck, bruising and abrasions to her right arm, chest, and neck. Ashley suffered multiple blows to her face, according to testimony from Dr. Fries, a witness in the case. Additionally, he mentioned that Ashley's eyes had patachi, which suggested that she might have been strangled or suffocated. Dr. Fries clarified that a fractured cricoid, a neck cartilage, is more frequently linked to severe force or auto accidents and is rarely observed in asphyxia or strangulation cases. Ashley's death was ruled a homicide after he determined that she died from asphyxia and blunt force trauma to her head and neck. Carter's trial was surrounded by a compelling and heartbreaking courtroom drama. The foundation of her defense was the claim that she was not responsible for Ashley's untimely death. She bravely removed the layers of fear and manipulation that had surrounded her life by taking the stand to testify in her own defense. Carter's testimony portrayed Clarence as a domineering and dangerous man, painting an unsettling picture of their relationship. She disclosed that he had a terrifying amount of control over her day-to-day activities, including deciding when she was allowed to eat and drink, as she admitted to trying to rob the American Eagle store. The entire courtroom listened intently, but she maintained that Clarence's threatening words were what forced her to commit this crime. She told of the terrifying time he pulled out a gun and gave her the order to steal. To make matters worse for her, he claimed that if she refused to accept the money, a dangerous threat would be waiting outside her parents' house, threatening their lives. Carter's story took a darker turn when she described a horrific experience in which she was raped by two unidentified men. She claimed that Clarence himself had allowed these attackers to enter her apartment, and she had to endure the unspeakable cruelty of their acts. Carter adamantly insisted that Ashley was innocent on the fateful night of her murder. She testified that she was asleep in her bed and did not know where Clarence was at the time. She strongly denied any role in Ashley's death and firmly stated that she was not involved in the tragic incident. In a remarkably quick decision that took only 2 hours, the jury remained skeptical despite Carter's compelling testimony and returned a guilty verdict. Carter was given a life sentence without the chance of release as a result. That was not the end of the case. Clarence also appeared in court, arguing that he was innocent of Ashley's murder, but the same lack of response was given to his claims. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, just like Carter, after the jury, clearly unimpressed by his claims, found him guilty as charged. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. After making a late-night roadside help call in January 2013, 26-year-old Texas father Brandon Mason Lawson disappeared. When his car was discovered abandoned, what had started out as a typical night took an enigmatic turn. Brandon's voice shook in terror as he called 911 in a panic, whispering that he was being pursued and desperately needed assistance. Brandon remained a mystery despite a great deal of searching and investigation, leaving his friends and family in a desperate search for answers. What actually transpired that evening, and who was he fleeing from? Let's investigate the enigma. Brandon Lawson was an oil field worker from San Angelo, Texas at the time of his disappearance. According to reports, he was a devoted partner to his girlfriend, Eliza Lofton, whom he had dated for 10 years, and a loving father to 4 children. Eliza was the stepmother of Brandon's oldest daughter and the mother of their 3 children. Brandon's recent drug relapse, which resulted in his inexplicable absences, caused Ledessa great concern. Their bond was forged over years of shared experiences and the difficulties of raising a family together, despite the usual ups and downs in their relationship. But Brandon, like a lot of young people, had his share of difficulties. He had previously abused drugs, particularly methamphetamines, but according to reports, he had been clean for roughly 6 months prior to the night of his disappearance. His friends and family knew him as a strong, industrious man who was trying to change his life. However, he had previously been overcome by the hold of addiction, and he was burdened by the strain of juggling his demanding work in the oil industry with his family life. The events leading to Brandon's disappearance began on the evening of August 8, 2013, when he and Ledessa got into a fight. It started off like any other evening. After a long day of work, Brandon got home in San Angelo between 10:45 and 11 p.m. Brandon and Ledessa got into a heated argument. Although it was initially unclear what specifically started the argument, Ledessa later disclosed that she became irritated and suspicious when Brandon failed to come home the night before. After the argument grew more heated, Brandon made the decision to leave the house at 11:30 p.m. About 3 hours' drive from San Angelo, he called his father and said he was coming to his home in Crowley, Texas. He left Ledessa behind and climbed into his silver Ford F-150 at 11:54 p.m. At the time, she didn't think much of it and assumed he would calm down and come back. Ledessa later reflected on the altercation in a 2018 interview, explaining that it was caused by a number of factors. The recent birth of their youngest son, which created additional stressors between them, and Brandon's rigorous work schedule, which involved more than 60 hours per week, were major contributing factors. Ledessa acknowledged the emotional weight of her words and conveyed her sincere regret for the argument. She acknowledged that she put a lot of the blame on herself. The memory of their most recent altercation still plagued her, and she remarked, "I will never get those words back." Brandon called his brother Kyle at around 12:30 a.m. on August 9 to let him know that he had run out of gas on Highway 277 close to the tiny town of Bronte. The town of Bronte is surrounded by a broad, rocky region of desert and hills. It is surrounded by rough, harsh terrain, including dry riverbeds, rocky outcrops, and steep hills. There aren't many people living there, and it's secluded. There aren't many services in the area, and cell phone service is scarce. During the night, the sky is so dark that only the stars can be seen. The wind is the only thing breaking the heavy silence. Being stuck in a location like this can quickly turn into a major issue. Brandon Lawson experienced precisely this on the evening of August 9, 2013. Just outside of Bronte, on Highway 277, his truck ran out of gas. All of a sudden, he found himself isolated in a remote location, vulnerable to the hostile surroundings. All he could do was wait for his brother. Kyle remembered that Brandon sounded uncontrollable during one of their calls. He informed Kyle that he was being pursued, which clearly caused concern. Brandon clarified that the Mexicans in the neighborhood were pursuing him when Kyle asked for more information. Kyle, still perplexed, inquired as to whether Brandon was hallucinating as a result of drug use, but Brandon denied it. Kyle didn't know what was happening, but he was worried. In order to assist Brandon, he hurried to Ledessa's house with his wife and their 4-year-old child to get a fuel can. Kyle continued to try to contact his brother while they were driving. However, Brandon never seemed able or willing to engage in a full conversation when they spoke. Kyle tried his hardest to communicate and gain a comprehensive understanding of Brandon's predicament, but their brief and fragmented exchanges added mystery to an already perplexing situation. One of the most important and perplexing pieces of evidence in the case is the distressing 911 call that Brandon made at 12:50 a.m. Due to routing errors, the 911 call was sent to a nearby nursing home in Robert Lee, Texas. Brandon's voice was erratic and panicked during the call. Some phrases stood out among his difficult-to-understand words. The dispatcher tried to question Brandon, who was obviously perplexed by the call, but his answers were jumbled and ambiguous. He appeared to be in a panic and said that he was being chased into the woods and that he needed help right away. Even though the call was unclear, it was clear that Brandon was upset and thought someone was chasing him. The phone logs that precede Brandon's disappearance are broken down as follows. Kyle left a voicemail at 12:51 a.m. after Brandon claimed he was being pursued. After their argument, Brandon attempted to call Ledessa, but was unsuccessful because she had left her phone in her car. When Kyle's wife called Brandon as well, and Kyle called him again without getting a response, the urgency increased. Brandon called his neighbor at 12:57 a.m., but this did not provide any answers. Brandon was contacted by a nursing home dispatcher regarding his previous 911 call at 1:04 a.m. Brandon then called Kyle 3 more times at 1:09 a.m. He informed Kyle that he was bleeding while running through a field during one of these calls. In a subsequent interview, Kyle stated that he didn't believe Brandon was gravely injured. He thought his brother had just tripped or been in a small mishap. Brandon then called Kyle one last time at 1:15 a.m. This would be the final calls he made from his phone before it became silent. That night is depicted as chaotic by this series of calls. Brandon was obviously in distress and was attempting to contact his neighbor, brother, girlfriend, and even 911. However, meaningful communication was almost impossible because of bad cell reception, his panic, and perhaps the hazardous and dark terrain. The uncertainty surrounding his last moments was further compounded by the confusion between his calls and his family's efforts to find him. When a truck driver called to report that Brandon's truck was parked dangerously on the side of the road, a Coke County Sheriff's deputy arrived at the scene at around 1 a.m. Kyle had also arrived at the scene by the time the deputy did, but Brandon was nowhere to be seen. During a phone conversation with Kyle at 1:18 a.m., Brandon claimed to be able to see both Kyle and the deputy from his hiding place, saying, "I can see you. I'm right here." However, neither Kyle nor the deputy were able to see Brandon anywhere near the truck or the surrounding area, which further complicated the situation. Kyle believed Brandon was attempting to elude the police because he had an active warrant for his arrest in Johnson County on a charge of drug possession with intent to deliver. Brandon didn't want to be caught, he reasoned, especially since the deputy was already there. Kyle and the deputy didn't have all the information necessary to comprehend what was actually going on, because they were unaware that Brandon had called 911 earlier. Later, Kyle stated that he didn't believe he was in danger. Kyle made the decision to drive a short distance up the road after speaking with the deputy. After the deputy left, he parked farther down in the hopes that Brandon would emerge from hiding. After waiting there for 30 to 45 minutes, Kyle decided that everything was okay and departed for San Angelo. When Brandon failed to appear, Kyle went back to the location where his truck had run out of gas at around 5 in the morning on August 9. Once more, Brandon failed to show up when he called for his brother. A deputy reported that a small private search team had been assembled to find Brandon on August 11. A few days later, they searched until about noon without discovering anything significant, having begun at about 8 a.m. The only hint they found was a tiny spot beneath a tree where it appeared someone had taken a seat. This location was visible from his truck and near the road. There were no additional indications of Brandon or his whereabouts, despite Kyle and the search team's best efforts, leaving his family with more questions than answers. Many theories have been proposed in the years following Brandon's disappearance. Some stem from the peculiarity of his last phone conversations, while others are based on the case's facts. The notion that Brandon might have been the victim of foul play is one of the most talked about theories. There has been conjecture that Brandon came into contact with someone or something dangerous on the evening of August 9, 2013, after he reported being chased into the woods in his 911 call. Some have even proposed that drug use may have played a role. People question whether Brandon was in danger, possibly a drug deal gone wrong or a run-in with violent people while stuck on the highway, given that he had used methamphetamines just before the incident. But this theory is called into question by the paucity of evidence. There were no reports of other cars in the vicinity at the time, and no evidence of a struggle was discovered close to his truck. Many people were left wondering whether foul play was involved, where it occurred, and who was involved, because the scene surrounding the truck was oddly undisturbed. The idea that Brandon may have intentionally vanished is another theory that has gained some traction. At the time, his life was complicated. Maybe he took extreme action because of his tumultuous relationship with his girlfriend, personal problems, and legal troubles. According to some, Brandon might have taken advantage of the circumstance to flee his life and start over somewhere else. There is some circumstantial evidence to support this theory. The key to Brandon's pickup truck, which had been left partially over the white line on the road, was in his possession, alone. Law enforcement started looking into the incident shortly after the truck was towed on August 9, 2013, at around 8 a.m. Assigned to the case, Deputy Neal looked for indications of activity at a number of nearby properties. The deputy wanted to find out if Brandon might have sought shelter or water on any of these properties, many of which were only used during certain seasons, but Neal couldn't find any evidence that Brandon had been there. After LaDessa formally reported missing on August 13, Texas Ranger Nick Hanna, who was now in charge of the case, searched the area in a helicopter. Brandon was nowhere to be seen when they flew over the area close to Highway 277 and the Colorado River. One intriguing finding from the helicopter search was that there was enough exposed ground for someone who was lying down or hiding to have probably been seen from above. Deputies came to the conclusion that Brandon Lawson had left Coke County as a result of this. The deputy wrote in his final report that he didn't think Brandon was hiding or lost in the area. He based his conclusion on several factors. According to Kyle Lawson, Brandon was probably hiding in the brush close to his truck so the deputy wouldn't find him. Nevertheless, the truck and its surroundings showed no indications of foul play. Above all, Brandon and LaDessa's text messages from the night of his disappearance suggested a furious dispute. Neal thought Brandon most likely walked back to the road and hitched a ride from a passing car after he and Kyle left the scene. The idea that Brandon purposefully vanished has only grown stronger as a result of his ongoing absence over the years. The region was going through a serious drought when he vanished. They were able to identify small items like corn sacks from the air during aerial searches. They could have easily seen Brandon if he had been on the ground. In addition, the river in the region was incredibly low, only reaching knee-deep in its deepest sections. These circumstances implied that Brandon would have been discovered during their searches if he had been in the region. Brandon's active warrant for possession with intent to deliver was also mentioned by the deputy as a potential explanation for his disappearance. He surmised that Brandon might have chosen to flee in order to stay out of legal hot water. The fact that Brandon cashed in his $401,000 with Renegade Oil Services shortly before going missing, potentially as part of a disappearance plan, lends more credence to this theory. Kyle Lawson was asked to meet with Sheriff McCutcheon, Ranger Hanna, and a Johnson County investigator at the same location where Brandon's warrant had been issued several months after Brandon vanished. They interrogated Kyle about his role, asking whether he had hurt or assisted his brother in getting away. In the end, Kyle asked for a polygraph to clear his name. Kyle claims that he passed the test on hurting his brother, despite some inconsistencies brought on by coughing during the exam. The accidental death or lost in the wilderness theory is another explanation for his disappearance. Arid and rocky, Highway 277 is home to cacti, thorny bushes, and dangerous creatures like wild hogs and rattlesnakes. This belief appears to be supported by the thorough searches that have been conducted, but every lead has ended in disappointment, with no sign of him. According to the final theory, Brandon's recent use of methamphetamines may have caused him to suffer from drug-induced hallucinations or paranoia. Severe paranoia, disorientation, and unpredictable conduct are all possible side effects of methamphetamine, especially if the user has been up for a long time. Brandon may have fled into the wilderness in a confused state, and his references to people chasing him may have been the product of a drug-induced hallucination. The term paranoia describes a strong mistrust or fear of other people, frequently coupled with illogical ideas or convictions that someone or something is trying to hurt them. Even when there are no actual external threats, paranoia in the context of drug use can show up as an elevated sense of threat or danger. Brandon's strange phone calls may be explained by this theory, but it doesn't address the question of what happened to him after he fled his truck. Did the weather get to him? Did he get stuck somewhere inaccessible or fall into a ravine? His family was left in a difficult position after Brandon Lawson vanished, caught between hope and the harsh realities of life. Brad Lawson, his father, struggles with mixed feelings. He is plagued by nightmares in which Brandon is still alive, possibly coerced into slave labor by a cartel, even though he is aware that the likelihood of Brandon surviving is remote. The possibility of foul play seems limitless, and Brad can't get rid of the thought that his son might still be out there somewhere. Is it possible that Brandon was being followed that evening? Did he encounter death when he entered private property? Or was it a crime of opportunity, where someone walked by, saw his weakness, and took advantage of him? Elisa Lofton can't stand the uncertainty. She worries that her kids won't ever know what happened to their father when they grow up, get married, or even start a family of their own. She is troubled by the memory of that night, particularly the altercation they had before he vanished. She battles this guilt every day after hurtful words were exchanged. The odd 911 call Brandon made that evening serves as their final connection to him. It serves as a painful reminder of his last moments for Ledessa and her kids. His two older daughters try to understand his words as they listen to the recording on YouTube, but it only makes their heartache worse. Brad is adamant that his son did not simply flee. He contends that Brandon was not forced to leave his family because the arrest warrant was insufficient. Brandon was always prepared to accept the consequences because he had previously dealt with legal issues. He actually had plans for the future, including beginning a new job the Monday after his disappearance that would pay more and come with the fact that none of Brandon's possessions, including his phone, wallet, keys, or even his shoes, have ever been located only serves to further complicate matters. How someone could vanish so totally without leaving any trace is beyond his brother's comprehension. The family's suspicion that foul play was involved is only strengthened by this. Ledessa is hopeful that someone will eventually come forward because she thinks that someone out there is aware of what happened to Brandon. She is still plagued by unresolved questions, such as the identity of the dispatcher who spoke to Brandon that evening and the trucker who reported his pickup. Ledessa thinks that these individuals may possess important hints that could ultimately clarify what transpired. Ledessa can't help but notice the ominous tone of Brandon's 911 call, even though she tells herself that his disappearance might have been an accident. She finds it hard to accept that someone would hurt the man she cherished so much. Help Find Brandon Lawson, a Facebook page created by Brandon Lawson's friends and family, has received a lot of support and attention since it was created. The page has more than 2,000 followers as of 2024, indicating that Brandon's unsolved disappearance has generated a lot of interest and concern. This website is a vital resource for disseminating news, details, and appeals pertaining to Brandon's case. It gives Brandon's family members a place to communicate with supporters, reminisce about Brandon, and coordinate efforts to keep his story in the public eye. The page encourages anyone with information regarding Brandon's whereabouts or the circumstances surrounding his disappearance to come forward, and plays a crucial part in the ongoing search for answers. Paula Boudreau, Ledessa's hired private investigator, has also been putting in a lot of effort to find hints. The sizable community that follows the Help Find Brandon Lawson Facebook page frequently provides her with leads. Boudreau has encountered challenges while searching the land with cadaver dogs and helicopters. On their property, some landowners have refused to permit searches. Prior to 2022, there had been no leads or noteworthy advancements in the hunt for Brandon Lawson. But at Brandon's last known location, a small search team made a breakthrough in early 2022. They notified the authorities after finding a pile of his clothing. Human remains were discovered nearby shortly after. The Help Find Brandon Lawson Facebook page announced in October 2023 that the clothing discovered and initial DNA results suggested the remains were probably Brandon's. To compare the genetic markers from the remains with Brandon's father's DNA, more tests were being conducted. The Texas Ranger in charge of the case said he was cautiously optimistic that the remains would be identified. There have been no new developments regarding the identification as of October 2024. 11 years have passed since Brandon vanished, and his family is still looking for answers. Unfortunately, because of their advanced state of decomposition, these remains have not yet been definitively identified, leaving little material for identification. A portion of the remains are destroyed each time a sample is taken out and examined. For upcoming DNA testing, it is therefore imperative to preserve as much as possible. In an attempt to extract enough DNA, the remains have been sent to 2 labs, but the results have been negative thus far. The family is unable to provide additional information regarding the investigation's current status or the other options the Texas Rangers were considering in June 2023 for identifying the remains. The finding of Brandon Lawson's remains is likely to put an end to the tragic and enigmatic case of his disappearance. Even with this possible resolution, there are still a lot of unsolved questions regarding what happened that evening. Even though they are thankful for some closure, his family might never find all the answers they are looking for. The anguish of not knowing a loved one's fate and the unpredictability of life are both highlighted in Brandon's story. It highlights the necessity of continual enhancements to search and rescue operations, particularly in isolated regions such as West Texas. The memories of Brandon Lawson will live on in the hearts of his loved ones and everyone who has followed his tragic story, even though the whole truth may never be known. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments, what part of this story shocked you the most? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.